They say the weak don't survive in a world built on dominance. But what happens when the weakest among us carries a power so ancient, so absolute, that even the strongest alphas fall to their knees without knowing why? Tonight, I'm telling you the story of a girl who was nothing until the moment she became everything. This is the tale of Celine Vera, the Omega who made kings bow. Stay with me until the very end, and if this story grips you the way it gripped an entire kingdom, hit that like and drop your city in the comments below. Let's see where my pack is watching from tonight. The servants' quarters smelled like damp stone and old shame. Celine Vera pressed her back against the cold wall, fingers trembling as she wrapped the torn fabric tighter around her wrist. Blood seeped through anyway. 3 hours until the ceremony started, and her hands already looked like they'd been through a war. Not that anyone would notice. She was Omega, lowest of the low. The kind of wolf whose scent barely registered to the higher ranks, whose name was forgotten before it was spoken, whose entire existence could be summarized in a single dismissive glance. The other servants rushed past her in the corridor, their arms loaded with ceremonial banners and golden chalices destined for the great hall. Nobody looked at her. Nobody ever did. Celine moved toward the washing basin, her reflection catching in the cracked mirror above it. Dark eyes, hollow cheeks. The face of someone who'd learned early that survival meant becoming invisible. Her wolf had never fully manifested, never given her the strength or presence that even the lowest pack members possessed. 22 years old, and she still felt like a ghost haunting a world that didn't want her. The basin water turned pink as she rinsed her wrist. The wound wasn't deep, just another casualty of kitchen work and clumsy hands. But her fingers wouldn't stop shaking. Deep breath. Get through tonight. Just get through tonight. The Blood Moon Gathering happened once every 5 years. Every pack from the Northern Territories descended on the capital to witness the selection of the new Alpha Council. It was politics and power wrapped in ceremony and tradition, a spectacle that reminded everyone where they stood in the hierarchy. And where Celine stood was at the very bottom, polishing floors and carrying trays, while the real wolves decided the fate of kingdoms. A sharp voice cut through the corridor behind her. "You! Omega!" Celine turned. Beta Karis stood in the doorway, her crimson gown flowing around her like fresh blood. Daughter of the Iron Fang clan's high commander, Karis wore her rank like armor. Everything about her screamed privilege, the way she held her chin, the casual cruelty in her smile, the absolute certainty that the world existed to serve her. The royal hall needs more wine, the northern section. Move. Celine nodded, keeping her eyes down. Yes, Lady Karis, and fix your appearance. You look like a corpse. Even servants should have some dignity. Karis swept away without waiting for a response, her perfume lingering in the air, expensive, floral, suffocating. Celine exhaled slowly. Her reflection stared back from the basin water, distorted and broken. Sometimes she wondered if she even existed at all. The royal hall was chaos dressed as elegance. Hundreds of wolves filled the massive chamber, their voices echoing off vaulted ceilings that seemed to touch the sky. Banners from every major pack hung from the walls. The Black Fang Legion's wolf skull, the Iron Fang clan's crossed swords, the Silver Moon dynasty's crescent moon. Power and tradition soaked into every stone. Celine moved through the crowd like smoke, carrying a tray of crystal wine glasses. Her presence didn't register. She was furniture, scenery, less than nothing. The alphas gathered near the center dais, their auras pressing against each other in subtle dominance displays. She could feel it even from a distance, that suffocating weight of command that made her wolf whimper and retreat deeper into whatever dark corner it hid in. Kale Draven stood among them, though he didn't participate in their posturing. Commander of the Black Fang Legion. Youngest general in Northern history. Ruthless, brilliant, and wrapped in so many scars, both visible and hidden, that even other alphas gave him space. Celine had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. But she'd never been this close. He stood perfectly still while the others circled and postured, his dark coat making him look like a shadow that had learned to walk upright. There was something unsettling about his stillness, like a blade waiting in its sheath. His eyes swept the room once, cold and calculating, before settling briefly on her. Celine froze. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. But in that moment, she felt seen in a way that made her skin prickle. Not with warmth or kindness, but with the uncomfortable awareness of a predator acknowledging prey. Then his gaze moved on, and she was invisible again. She released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Focus. Just do your job. The northern section of the hall was packed with lower-ranking wolves, betas mostly, along with a handful of omegas serving as attendants. Celine navigated through them, refilling glasses and clearing empty trays, her movements mechanical and practiced. A hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The tray tilted. Wine splashed across white marble. Well, well, look what we have here. Kara stood before her, surrounded by 3 other beta heiresses from prominent clans. Their smiles were identical, sharp, hungry, cruel. Celine kept her eyes down. My apologies, Lady Karis. I'll clean this immediately. Karis didn't release her wrist. She yanked Celine closer instead, her fingers digging in right where the earlier cut had been. Fresh blood welled up beneath the bandage. Do you know what tonight is, Omega? The selection ceremony, Lady Karis? Karis laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Tonight, the strongest bloodlines in the north gather to choose the wolves who will lead us into the next era. Alphas. True wolves, not pathetic little ghosts like you. The other betas giggled. One of them wrinkled her nose. Does she even have a scent? I can't smell anything. Probably defective. I heard she's from the ruined territories. No pack. No family. Nothing. Karis's grip tightened. Celine felt something in her wrist shift, grinding against bone. Tell me, servant, what do you think gives a wolf value? Strength? Bloodline? Power? Celine's jaw clenched. The pain in her wrist was spreading up her arm now, sharp and hot. I don't know, Lady Karis. You don't know. Karis's voice rose, carrying across the nearby crowd. Other wolves turned to watch, drawn by the promise of entertainment. This creature doesn't even know what makes a wolf valuable. Someone in the watching crowd laughed. Maybe she's not really a wolf at all. Maybe she's just a human playing dress-up. The laughter spread, rippling through the hall like infection. Celine stood there, head down, wrist bleeding, while hundreds of wolves watched and laughed. Her vision blurred at the edges. Not from tears, she'd learned years ago that tears only made it worse, but from something else, something deeper, something that tasted like ash and rage and ancient memory. Karis leaned in close, her breath hot against Celine's ear. You want to know the truth, Omega? You're nothing. You will always be nothing. And the sooner you accept that, the easier your miserable life will become. She shoved Celine backward. Celine stumbled, her shoulder hitting the marble column behind her. The laughter grew louder. Someone started a slow clap. Others joined in. The humiliation wrapped around her like chains, pressing down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. Just keep your head down. Just survive. Just... No. The word came from somewhere deep inside, somewhere she'd never heard before. It didn't sound like her voice. It sounded older, stronger. Wrong. Karis turned back to her audience, basking in the attention. And this is what passes for a wolf these days. Pathetic. Something cracked inside Celine's chest. Not physically, not audibly, but she felt it like a bone breaking, like a dam shattering, like a door that had been locked for centuries suddenly blown off its hinges. The air in the hall changed. It happened so fast that nobody understood it at first. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a single heartbeat. Every candle flame in the chamber bent sideways, as if pushed by an invisible wind. Shadows lengthened and twisted across the floor. And then the pressure hit. It wasn't physical. It was deeper than that. It was instinct made manifest, ancient command written directly into the DNA of every wolf in the room. It crashed over them like a tidal wave of absolute authority, bypassing thought and reason and pride to seize control of the animal brain beneath. One by one, the wolves dropped. Not fell. Dropped. Their knees hit the ground before they even realized they were moving. Alphas and betas alike. Their faces frozen in shock and confusion as their bodies betrayed them. Karis gasped, her legs buckling beneath her. She caught herself on her hands, crimson gown pooling around her on the marble floor. What is this? The laughter had stopped. The entire hall had gone silent except for the sound of bodies hitting stone and ragged breathing. And in the center of it all stood Celine Vera, the nothing Omega, the ghost girl, with her head finally raised and her eyes burning with light that hadn't existed in this world for 300 years. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know why the air felt thick as honey, why her skin burned, why every wolf in the chamber was on their knees looking at her with expressions caught between terror and awe. She only knew one thing. She was done bowing. The pressure intensified. Crystal glasses shattered on tables. Windows cracked. Somewhere in the distance, someone screamed. Cale Draven was the last alpha standing. He dropped to one knee, his hand braced against the floor, muscles straining against the invisible force pressing down on him. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth might crack. But his eyes never left her. And in them, Celine saw something that terrified her more than the chaos, more than the power, more than any of it. Recognition. Then her vision tunneled, the world tilting sideways as whatever had exploded out of her collapsed back in. She felt herself falling, heard shouting, felt hands catching her before she hit the ground. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Kael's face above hers, his expression unreadable. And the last thought that crossed her mind before unconsciousness took her was simple and absolute. Everything just changed. She woke in a cell. Not a dungeon exactly, but close enough. Stone walls, iron door. A narrow window letting in moonlight that fell across the floor in silver bars. Celine's head pounded like someone had used it as a drum. Her wrist throbbed where Karis had grabbed it. Every muscle in her body ached with exhaustion so deep it felt like she'd been awake for days. But she was alive. She sat up slowly, the rough blanket falling away from her shoulders. Someone had bandaged her wrist properly. Someone had brought water and bread, left on a small table near the door. Someone was keeping her alive, which meant they wanted something. The door opened. Cale Draven entered without knocking, because alphas didn't need permission for anything. He closed the door behind him with deliberate care, then stood there studying her with those cold, calculating eyes. Celine pressed her back against the wall, suddenly very aware of how small this room was. "Don't bother trying to run." Cale's voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. "There are 50 guards outside this door, and every alpha in the capital wants you dead or controlled. You wouldn't make it 10 steps. She found her voice. It came out steadier than she expected. "Then why am I still breathing? Because I haven't decided yet whether you're more valuable alive or dead." He moved closer, stopping just outside the reach of her legs if she decided to kick. Even wounded and exhausted, he still moved like violence barely restrained. "What happened in that hall, Omega? How did you do it?" It wasn't a question. Celine wrapped her arms around her knees. "I don't know." "Lie. It's not a lie." She met his eyes, surprised at her own boldness. "I don't know what happened. I've never felt anything like that before. I didn't even know I could command every alpha in the Northern Territories to kneel." Kael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interesting. He crouched down so they were eye level, his forearms resting on his knees. He looked like a wolf deciding whether to snap her neck or study her more carefully. "Do you know what you are, Celine Vera?" The way he said her name made her skin prickle, like he'd already investigated her, already pulled apart every piece of her pathetic history. "I'm Omega." "No." His voice dropped lower. "You're something else, something that shouldn't exist anymore." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. He unfolded it carefully and held it up to the moonlight. It was a drawing, crude but clear. A wolf with eyes that glowed like stars, surrounded by other wolves prostrated on the ground. And above it, written in script so old it looked like art, a single phrase. The Sovereign line. Celine's breath caught. Kael folded the parchment and tucked it away. 300 years ago, there was a bloodline that could command every wolf through instinct alone. Not through force or politics, but through something written into our very DNA. They called them the Sovereign Wolves. Natural rulers, living law. He leaned in closer. The packs feared them, so they killed them. Every single one. Burned their territories, erased their names, made sure that kind of power could never threaten the alpha hierarchy again. Or so everyone thought. Celine's hands were shaking again. That's impossible. If they were all killed, if they were all killed, then what happened in that hall shouldn't have been possible. But it was, which means someone survived. Someone passed down that bloodline in secret, hiding among the lowest ranks where nobody would ever look. His eyes bore into hers. You're not Omega, Celine. You're sovereign, and that makes you the most dangerous creature in this kingdom. The weight of his words settled over her like a death sentence. Outside, she could hear voices, shouting, the sound of boots on stone. Kyle stood, his hand moving to the weapon at his belt. The Alpha Council is gathering. They'll demand answers. Most of them will vote to execute you immediately. Then why are you telling me this? Because I need to know something first. He moved toward the door, then paused. That power inside you, can you control it? Celine thought about the moment in the hall, the crack inside her chest, the wave of authority that had exploded out of her like a dam breaking. No. That's what I thought. KL opened the door. Then pray you learn fast, because if you can't control it, someone else will try to. And trust me, Omega, you won't survive what they'll do to you. He left. The door locked behind him with a sound like a coffin closing. Celine sat in the darkness, her wrist throbbing, her head spinning, trying to understand how her entire world had just shattered and rebuilt itself in the span of a single night. She was sovereign. She was hunted. She was dangerous. And somewhere in the castle above her, wolves were gathering to decide her fate while she sat in this cell with power she couldn't control and a bloodline she didn't understand. The moonlight shifted across the floor. In the distance, a wolf howled, and deep inside her chest, something ancient stirred and whispered. They tried to kill us once. They won't succeed twice. The Alpha Council chamber reeked of old power and older fear. 12 stone seats arranged in a circle, each one occupied by a wolf who'd earned their position through blood and brutality. These were the rulers of the Northern Territories, the ones who'd maintained order through force and tradition for centuries. And right now, every single one of them was afraid. Chancellor Morvain stood at the center of the circle, his white beard failing to hide the tension in his jaw. He was old enough to remember when the last sovereign was executed, old enough to understand exactly what Celine's existence meant. We have a problem, his voice echoed off stone walls. A significant one. Significant. Alpha Torvin of the Bloodstone Pack laughed, but there was no humor in it. That creature dropped every wolf in the Grand Hall to their knees without touching them, without even trying. You call that significant. What I call it is impossible. Alpha Lissa of the Nightfall clan leaned forward. The sovereign line was eliminated 3 centuries ago. We made sure of it. Apparently, we didn't. Silence settled over the chamber, heavy and suffocating. Kyle stood outside the circle of seats, technically present, but not participating. Commanders weren't part of the council. They were tools the council used when they needed someone killed quietly or conquered efficiently. Right now, though, every eye kept drifting toward him. Chancellor Morvain finally addressed him directly. Commander Draven, you were in the hall. You felt it. What's your assessment? Kale didn't hesitate. She's sovereign. Dormant bloodline, probably suppressed through generations of breeding with lower ranks. The humiliation triggered something, awakened whatever genetic memory was buried inside her. Can she control it? No. Can she be controlled? Kale met the Chancellor's eyes. Unknown. Torvin slammed his fist on the armrest. Then we kill her. Now. Tonight. Before she becomes a threat we can't contain. Several heads nodded in agreement. Lissa raised a hand. Wait. If she truly is sovereign, killing her might trigger something worse. These bloodlines were known for death curses, revenge mechanisms written into their very essence. Superstition. Torvin waved dismissively. She's one girl, barely trained, weak. We execute her publicly and make it clear that the council won't tolerate threats to the natural order. The natural order. Morvain's voice carried an edge. The natural order is precisely what she represents. The sovereign line predates every pack in this room. They were the original Alpha Authority. Then they should have stayed dead. Kael shifted his weight, drawing attention without speaking. He'd learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than words. Let them argue. Let them reveal their fears and ambitions. Information was its own kind of weapon. Lissa turned to him. You've been researching this, haven't you, Commander? The old bloodlines. It wasn't a question. Kyle nodded once. The sovereign wolves weren't just powerful, they were stabilizers. Their presence prevented pack wars. When they were eliminated, the territories descended into 3 centuries of constant conflict. So you're suggesting we should keep her alive? I'm suggesting we understand what we're dealing with before we make decisions we can't undo. Torvin stood, his bulk impressive even among alphas. With all due respect, Commander, your job is to follow orders, not give them. The Council will decide what happens to the Omega. She's not Omega. Kale's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Torvin's words die in his throat. Stop calling her that. She's sovereign. Pretending otherwise won't make her less dangerous. The chamber fell silent again. Morvayn steepled his fingers. Commander Draven, you will escort the prisoner to the Lunar Dominion ceremony 3 nights from now. At that time, the full council will make a public judgment, and if she loses control before then you kill her. Morvayn's eyes were cold as winter. Whatever it takes. Kyle bowed his head in acknowledgement, the gesture more mockery than respect. As the council dismissed into smaller arguments and political maneuvering, Kyle slipped out of the chamber. The corridors were empty at this hour, lit only by torches that cast dancing shadows across stone. His second-in-command, Marcus, fell into step beside him. Well, Marcus kept his voice low. That went about as well as expected. They're terrified. Can you blame them? Marcus was one of the few wolves Kyle actually trusted, which said more about Kyle than about Marcus. That pressure in the hall. I've never felt anything like it. My wolf just submitted, didn't even question it. Kyle didn't respond. He was thinking about Celine's face in that cell, the confusion there, the fear. She genuinely hadn't known what she was doing, which made her either the most dangerous creature in the kingdom or the most valuable, depending on who got to her first. You believe her, don't you? Marcus studied him. About not knowing what she is? Kale stopped walking. He turned to face his second-in-command, making sure no one else was in earshot. I believe she's been kept weak deliberately. Someone knew what she was and made sure she never developed enough confidence or presence to trigger the awakening. They buried her in the servant ranks where she'd never encounter real threats or humiliation severe enough to crack the suppression. Until Karis decided to make her a public spectacle. Until Karis gave her no choice but to fight back. Kale resumed walking. Now the dam is broken. That power will keep surfacing, probably in response to emotional triggers she can't control. Fear, rage, humiliation. So what's your play? Kyle was silent for a long moment. They turned a corner, descending toward the lower levels where Celine was being held. I'm going to teach her to control it. Marcus stopped walking. The council ordered you to guard her, not train her. The council ordered me to kill her if she becomes a threat. Kyle looked back at his second. I intend to make sure she doesn't. Why? Because the council is right about one thing. If she stays weak and afraid, she will be used. By someone. There are wolves in this kingdom who would do unspeakable things to possess that kind of power. He thought about the sealed records he'd uncovered, the ones showing exactly what the packs had done to the last sovereign wolves before they died. Torture, experiments, breeding programs, attempts to transfer the power, to bottle it, to own it. It had been 300 years, but wolves had long memories and even longer ambitions. She needs to be strong enough to protect herself, or everything that happened 3 centuries ago will happen again. Marcus absorbed this. And if the council finds out you're training her instead of containing her, then I'll deal with the council. The words hung in the air like a threat or a promise. They reached Celine's cell. The guards outside straightened as Kyle approached. He dismissed them with a gesture, waiting until they were out of earshot before unlocking the door. Celine was sitting exactly where he'd left her, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the moonlight. She looked up as he entered. The fear was still there, but underneath it, something else was beginning to kindle, something harder. Get up. Kyle's voice was flat. You have 3 days until the Lunar Dominion ceremony. 3 days to learn how to control what's inside you, and if I can't, then we're both dead. He held out his hand. Celine stared at it for a long moment, probably seeing all the ways this could be a trap, all the reasons to refuse. Then she reached out and took it. Her hand was small in his, fingers still trembling slightly, but her grip was firm. Good. Kale pulled her to her feet. Lesson 1. Never bow unless you choose to. That power inside you responds to submission. The more you accept being weak, the harder it is to access your strength. I've been weak my entire life. I know. His eyes met hers. That ends tonight. He led her out of the cell, through corridors lit by dying torches, toward the training grounds deep beneath the castle. Behind them, Marcus followed silently, hand on his weapon, ready for whatever chaos was about to unfold. And in the shadows, other eyes watched. The council had spies everywhere, and word was already spreading through the castle like infection. The Omega who made Alphas kneel was being trained by the most dangerous commander in the Northern Territories. Some wolves whispered about rebellion, others whispered about salvation, and a few, the oldest and most cunning, whispered about opportunity. Because in a kingdom built on dominance and hierarchy, there was nothing more valuable than power, and nothing more dangerous than a wolf who didn't yet understand what they possessed. 3 days until the ceremony. 3 days until judgment. 3 days until the entire kingdom discovered whether Celine Vera was their doom or their deliverance. The training began at midnight, in a chamber so deep beneath the castle that even screams couldn't reach the surface. And in that darkness, lit only by torchlight and ancient instinct, a fallen Omega took her first steps toward becoming something the world hadn't seen in 3 centuries. A queen without a crown, a ruler without a throne, a sovereign who could either unite the fractured territories or burn them all to ash. The choice, Kale knew, would depend entirely on what the next 3 days revealed, and whether Celine Vera had the strength to become what she was born to be before the wolves circling her decided to destroy what they couldn't control. The training chamber was older than the castle above it, stone walls carved with symbols that predated written language. Channels cut into the floor where blood had once flowed during ceremonies nobody remembered anymore. The air tasted like iron and earth and something else, something that made Celine's skin prickle with recognition she couldn't name. Kael released her hand and moved to the center of the chamber. The torch he carried cast his shadow across the walls, making him look twice his size. "Take off your shoes." Celine blinked. "What?" "Your shoes. The ground needs to feel you. The connection matters." She knelt and removed her worn servant's shoes, the stone cold against her bare feet. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that she shouldn't be here, that commanders didn't train Omegas in the middle of the night for any good reason. But something deeper than instinct kept her rooted in place. "Stand in the center." Kael moved to the edge of the chamber. "Close your eyes. This feels like an execution. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. Now close your eyes." She did. The darkness behind her eyelids was complete. She could hear Kael's breathing across the chamber, slow and controlled. Could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Tell me what you felt." His voice came from somewhere to her left. "In the hall. When it happened." Celine's jaw tightened. "I don't know." "Yes, you do. Stop hiding from it." The memory rose like bile. Karis's fingers digging into her wrist, the laughter spreading through the crowd, the humiliation wrapping around her throat until she couldn't breathe. "I felt nothing." "Liar." The word cracked across the chamber like a whip. Celine's eyes snapped open. Kael stood directly in front of her now, close enough that she could see the scar tissue crossing his throat. His eyes were flat and cold. "You felt rage. You felt violated. You felt like if you didn't do something, didn't become something, you would disappear entirely. And for one moment, you stopped accepting it." Her hands were shaking again. That's when it surfaced. Kael circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. The power doesn't come from strength. It comes from refusal. Your entire life, you've swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every act of cruelty. You made yourself small because that's how you survived. He stopped behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. But tonight, you refused. And that refusal cracked something open that was never supposed to wake up. Celine's breathing was shallow. "I didn't mean to." "I know, that's the problem." Kael moved back in front of her. "Right now, your power is tied to emotion. Fear, anger, humiliation. It erupts when you're pushed past breaking, but that's not control. That's chaos waiting to destroy you and everyone around you. So how do I control it? You learn to access it without breaking first. You learn to refuse without needing permission from pain. That sounds impossible. Everything does until you do it. He reached for his belt and drew a knife. The blade caught the torchlight, throwing patterns across the walls. Celine took a step back. Relax. Cale flipped the knife and held it out to her, handle first. I'm not going to hurt you. You're going to hurt me. Her eyes widened. What? Take the knife. Cale's voice was utterly calm. Attack me. I can't. You can. You will. Or you'll die in 3 days when the council decides you're too dangerous to keep alive. The knife handle was rough against her palm. The blade was heavier than she expected. I know. That's why we're starting now. Cale spread his arms slightly, exposing his chest. Come at me. Try to hurt me. Try to kill me. Celine's wolf was whimpering inside her chest, every instinct screaming that you didn't attack an alpha. You didn't raise a weapon against a commander. You didn't do it. She lunged. It was clumsy and slow and pathetic. Cale sidestepped effortlessly, his hand catching her wrist and twisting. The knife clattered to the floor. Celine gasped as he spun her around, her back pressed against his chest, his arm across her throat. Not cutting pressure, just presence. That's submission. His breath was hot against her ear. You telegraphed the attack because part of you needed me to stop you. Your wolf is still trained to obey. We're going to break that. He released her and stepped back. Again. They repeated it 17 times. 17 times, Celine attacked. 17 times, Cale disarmed her with minimal effort. By the 18th attempt, sweat soaked through her shirt and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the knife. Why isn't it working? Because you're still asking permission. Cale's voice was merciless. Every attack, you hesitate. Your wolf checks with mine first, sees that I'm alpha, and aborts the strike before it lands. You're a slave to hierarchy even when you're trying to break free from it. I don't know how to stop. Then you'll die. Simple as that. Something inside Celine cracked. Not the same way it had in the hall, but smaller, sharper. You think I want this? Her voice came out raw. You think I chose to be Omega, to be nothing, to spend my entire life bowing to wolves who treat me like I'm disposable? No, but you chose to survive by becoming smaller. That was your strategy, and it worked until tonight. He picked up the knife and pressed it back into her hand. Now you need a new strategy, because small won't save you anymore. The entire kingdom knows what you are. They're coming for you whether you fight back or not. His eyes bore into hers. So the only question is whether you're going to meet them on your knees or on your feet. Celine's fingers tightened on the knife handle. This time when she lunged, something was different. The hesitation was still there, but smaller. Her wolf still whimpered, but quieter. The blade came within an inch of Cale's ribs before he deflected it. He smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. Better. Neck. They trained until dawn broke somewhere above them, until Celine's muscles screamed and her hands bled from gripping the knife too hard. Cale pushed her past exhaustion, past coherent thought, past the place where her conscious mind could interfere with instinct. And slowly, incrementally, something began to shift. The attacks came faster, more committed. Her wolf still resisted, still tried to submit, but the resistance grew weaker each time. On the 43rd attempt, Celine's blade actually touched Cale's coat before he disarmed her. He looked down at the small tear in the fabric, then back at her. Good. Now forget the knife. We're done with physical weapons. He kicked the blade across the chamber, sending it skittering into shadows. The real weapon is what you did in that hall. That pressure, that command. You're going to learn to summon it without waiting for humiliation to force your hand. I don't know how. Then we'll find out together. Cale moved back to the center of the chamber. Try to make me kneel. Celine stared at him. Just like that. Just like that. I don't even know where to start. Start with anger. Cale's expression was unreadable. Think about every wolf who's dismissed you, every alpha who's looked through you like your furniture. Every moment you swallowed rage because showing it would have gotten you killed. That's a lot of moments. I know. Use them. Celine closed her eyes. The memories came easily because they'd never really left. Karis's cruel laughter. The servants who'd shoved past her in corridors. The pack gatherings where she'd served food to wolves who didn't bother learning her name. 22 years of being nothing. 22 years of disappearing. She reached for that crack inside her chest, the one that had broken open in the hall. Reached for the rage that lived there, buried under layers of survival instinct and learned helplessness. Found it and pushed. Nothing happened. Cale stood exactly where he'd been, arms crossed, waiting. Celine's eyes opened. I can't. You're thinking too much. This isn't a mental exercise, it's instinct. Your bloodline didn't survive 3 centuries of genocide by being rational. Then what do I do? Stop trying to control it. Stop trying to be good. Just refuse. Refuse what? Everything. His voice dropped lower. Refuse their hierarchy. Refuse their rules. Refuse the lie that you're less than them because some arbitrary system said so. Celine's hands clenched into fists. You want me to break everything. I want you to remember that you were never actually broken, just convinced you were. Something shifted in her chest. Not the crack, something deeper. Something that felt like recognition. She thought about the hall, about Karis's fingers on her wrist, about the moment right before the power erupted, when she'd stopped apologizing and started resisting. That moment when no had finally become more important than survival. She reached for it again. Not the rage this time. The refusal. The air in the chamber changed. It was subtle at first, a pressure building like a storm forming. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign he felt it. Good. Keep going. Celine pushed harder, not with her mind, with something older, something written in her bones. The part of her that remembered being sovereign before anyone taught her to be Omega. The pressure intensified. Kael's knees buckled slightly. He caught himself, muscles straining, but for a moment his body had tried to obey a command she hadn't even spoken aloud. Then it collapsed. The pressure vanished like smoke. Celine gasped, staggering. Kael straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders. 20 seconds. That's how long you held it. That felt like forever. In a fight, 20 seconds is nothing. You need minutes, hours. You need to be able to maintain that pressure until every wolf in this kingdom understands that defying you isn't an option. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. Not warmth, not kindness, but the acknowledgement that she'd done something difficult and done it successfully. Why are you helping me? The question came out before she could stop it. The council wants me dead. You could kill me right now and be rewarded for it. Kael was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge she couldn't quite identify. Because I've seen what happens when power concentrates in the hands of wolves who use fear to maintain control. The council. The pack hierarchies. The entire system that keeps creatures like you buried and creatures like Karis elevated. He moved closer. You're not a threat to the kingdom, Celine. You're a threat to their power. And maybe it's time their power was threatened. That sounds like treason. Only if we lose. The torchlight flickered between them. Outside, dawn was breaking. Soon the castle would wake. Soon wolves would come looking for answers about the Omega who'd made alphas kneel. But in this moment, in this ancient chamber beneath layers of stone and history, Celine felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous hope. The kind that got Omegas killed when they reached for things they weren't supposed to want. But hope, nonetheless. Again. Kael moved back to his position. We have 2 more days. By the time you stand before that council, you're going to be able to hold that pressure until they beg you to release them. And if I can't... His expression was absolutely serious. Then I'll kill you myself before they can turn you into a weapon. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost like kindness. A clean death at the hands of someone who understood what she was versus the alternative. Celine took a breath and reached for that place inside her chest again. This time, the pressure came faster. Keats. They emerged from the training chamber 3 hours later, both of them looking like they'd survived a war. Marcus waited in the corridor above, his expression carefully neutral when he saw them. The morning patrol is asking questions. Half the castle felt something during the night, like a storm building underground. Let them wonder. Kael's voice was flat with exhaustion. Where's the girl being kept now? Back in her cell. Council's orders. Celine felt the weight of those words settle over her. Back to the cage. Back to being a thing they kept locked away until they decided what to do with her. Kale must have seen something in her expression because he turned to Marcus. Change of plans. She stays in the commander's quarters. Marcus's eyebrows rose fractionally. That's going to raise questions. Everything raises questions now. At least this way she's somewhere I can actually protect her. He started walking, not waiting to see if Celine would follow. She did, because what else could she do? Her feet ached, her muscles screamed. Every part of her body felt like it had been pulled apart and badly reassembled, but she was still standing. They navigated through corridors that grew progressively nicer as they climbed. Servant passages gave way to guard quarters, which gave way to officer territory. By the time they reached the commander's section, the walls were lined with weapons and battle standards from campaigns Celine had only heard about in whispered stories. Kael's quarters were sparse, a bed that looked barely used, a desk covered in maps and reports, weapons mounted on every wall within easy reach. The window overlooked the training yards, where dawn light was just beginning to touch the frost-covered ground. Sleep. Kael gestured toward the bed. You have 6 hours before we train again. Where will you sleep? I won't. He moved to the desk and began sorting through papers. Too much work. Celine wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling her under like a riptide. She collapsed onto the bed without removing her boots. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Kael's voice, quiet and almost gentle. You did well tonight. Then darkness. She woke to shouting, her eyes snapped open, body tensing before she fully understood where she was. Kael's quarters. Afternoon light streaming through the window, voices raised in anger somewhere outside. The door burst open. Kara stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 beta guards. Her face was twisted with rage and something that looked almost like fear. You. Her voice shook. You're being kept in his quarters like some kind of... Karis's words died as Kael appeared behind her, moving with that silent predator grace. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. His presence alone made her step back. You don't have clearance for this section, Lady Karis. She spun to face him. The council demands answers. That creature attacked us, humiliated us, and now you're harboring her like she's some kind of honored guest instead of a prisoner. The prisoner is under my protection by council order. If you have concerns, take them to Chancellor Morvain. Karis's hands clenched into fists. My father is on that council. He won't let this stand. She shouldn't even exist. Things like her are abominations. Things. Kael's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Is that what you call sovereign bloodlines now? The color drained from Karis's face. That's just a legend, a story to scare children. Tell that to the bruises on your knees from when you bowed to her. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Karis looked like she wanted to say something, wanted to defend herself, but the memory of that moment clearly still haunted her. Instead, she turned her glare back to Celine. This isn't over. You think you're special because some ancient power woke up inside you, but you're still nothing, still weak, still Omega beneath whatever mask you're wearing. Celine sat up slowly. Every muscle protested, but she met Karis's eyes without looking away. And you're still a bully who needs an audience to feel powerful. Karis lunged forward. The beta guards caught her arms, holding her back as she snarled. You little... Enough! Kael's command cut through the room like a blade. Leave, now, before I have you removed forcibly. Karis jerked free from her guards, straightening her dress with shaking hands. You're making a mistake, Commander. When the Council decides to eliminate her, your protection won't save you from being labeled a traitor. Then I'll deal with that when it happens. The door. Karis left, but the hatred in her eyes promised this was far from finished. The guards followed, closing the door behind them. Kael waited until their footsteps faded before turning to Celine. That was stupid. Telling her the truth. Antagonizing someone whose family sits on the Alpha Council. His expression was unreadable. You need allies, not more enemies. She started it. And you could have ended it by staying quiet. Instead, you handed her ammunition to use against you. Celine stood, her legs unsteady. I'm tired of staying quiet. I know. That's how we're going to keep you alive. But pick your battles. Not every insult requires a response, even when they call me an abomination, especially then. Kael moved to the window, staring out at the training yards below. Words only have the power you give them. Right now, you need to conserve your energy for the fight that actually matters. The ceremony. The ceremony. He didn't turn around. 2 more days. The council is already positioning their pieces. Some want you dead. Others want you controlled. A few think they can use you to consolidate their own power. Which ones are you worried about? All of them. Because they're all dangerous in different ways. He finally looked back at her. The ones who want you dead will try to execute you publicly. Make an example that sovereign bloodlines don't get to exist anymore. The ones who want you controlled will try to collar you, bind you to their service through threats or blackmail or worse. And the ones who want to use you will pretend to be your allies, right until the moment they stab you in the back. Celine absorbed this. So I have no allies. You have one. Kael's eyes held hers. I'm not going to let them destroy you, but you need to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about power. And every wolf in that chamber will be calculating how your existence benefits or threatens them. What about you? She took a step closer. How does my existence benefit or threaten you? The question hung between them like a challenge. Kael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You remind me that the system isn't inevitable, that hierarchy isn't natural law, that maybe we've been doing this wrong for 300 years. He turned back to the window. And that terrifies them more than your power ever could. Buck. The second day of training was worse than the first. Kael pushed her harder, longer, with less mercy. They worked on holding the pressure for extended periods, on directing it at specific targets instead of flooding the entire room, on summoning it while exhausted, while distracted, while under physical threat. By midnight, Celine's nose was bleeding from the strain. Her wolf felt raw and exposed like a nerve scraped bare. Again. Kael didn't look tired. He never looked tired, just focused with that terrible intensity that made you believe he could stand there forever waiting for you to succeed or break. I can't. You can. Focus. The power isn't separate from you. It's not something you summon. It's something you are. That doesn't make sense. It will. Again. She reached inside herself, finding that place of refusal. The pressure built slowly, spreading through the chamber like storm clouds gathering. Kael's knees didn't buckle this time. He stood firm, muscles straining but holding. More. His voice was tight. Make me believe you'll kill me if I don't obey. I don't want to kill you. That's the problem. You're still asking, still hoping. Sovereign wolves don't ask permission. They command reality. Celine pushed harder. The pressure intensified until the air felt thick as water. Kael's jaw clenched. One knee started to bend. Then he spoke, and his voice cut through her concentration like a knife. Your mother begged before they killed her. The pressure shattered. Celine's eyes snapped open. What? She begged them not to hurt you. Kael straightened, breathing hard. Promised she'd do anything if they'd just let her daughter live. They killed her anyway. Burned her alive in front of the pack as a warning. How do you know that? Because I read the archives. The real ones. Not the sanitized versions they teach in pack schools. His eyes were hard. Your mother was sovereign too. Last survivor of the bloodline purge. She hid among the servant class for 16 years before someone discovered what she was. Celine felt like the ground was tilting beneath her. The council took her to the execution grounds and made it a spectacle. Wanted every wolf in the territory to see what happened when abominations tried to live among real wolves. She died screaming your name. Stop. You were 6 years old. They told you she died of fever. Let you grow up believing you were nobody. That you'd always been Omega, that your weakness was natural instead of constructed. His voice was merciless now. But you weren't nobody. You were the thing they feared most. And the only reason they didn't kill you too was because your power hadn't manifested yet. They thought maybe it had skipped a generation, that you'd just be another powerless Omega they could ignore. Tears burned in Celine's eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what they took from you. Kael moved closer. They didn't just kill your mother. They killed your identity, your history, your right to know what you were. She could barely breathe. Her chest felt like it was caving in. And now you're asking me to become the thing they murdered her for being. No, I'm asking you to refuse to let them murder you too. The tears fell. She couldn't stop them. Couldn't stop the grief that had been buried for 16 years suddenly erupting like a wound that had never properly healed. Kyle let her cry. Didn't offer comfort, didn't move. Just stood there like a stone, waiting for the storm to pass. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but dry. How did you find the archives? I've been looking for them since I was 17, since I watched the council execute someone for questioning their authority and realized the entire system was built on fear. He moved back to the center of the chamber. Your mother's death is in there, along with hundreds of others, wolves who were different, who asked the wrong questions, who threatened the natural order by existing. Celine's hands were shaking, but this time not from fear. Again. Kale's voice was quiet. And this time, remember what they took from you. She closed her eyes, reached for that place inside her chest. But this time, she didn't reach for rage or refusal. She reached for grief. For the mother she barely remembered. For the childhood stolen. For 16 years of believing she was broken when she'd been targeted. The pressure exploded out of her like a dam bursting. It wasn't gradual this time. It hit the chamber like a physical wave. The torches guttered. Stone dust rained from the ceiling. And Kyle, the unshakable commander, dropped to both knees with a sound like breaking. His head bowed. His entire body trembled with the effort of resisting, but his wolf submitted anyway, overwhelmed by an authority older than pack law. Celine held it. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Until Kyle gasped. Enough. She released it. The pressure vanished. Kyle collapsed forward onto his hands, breathing hard. When he looked up, there was blood at the corner of his mouth. That, his voice was rough. That is what you bring to the ceremony. Celine was shaking. I hurt you. You commanded me. There's a difference. He stood slowly, wiping the blood away. And for the first time since this started, I actually believe you might survive. The third day, they didn't train. Instead, Kyle took her to a part of the castle she'd never seen, ancient wings locked away from common use. He had keys that opened doors covered in dust and warnings. They descended into archives that smelled like time itself was rotting. These are the real records. Kyle's torch cast shadows across rows of shelves stacked with documents, everything they don't want anyone to see. He pulled down a leather-bound volume, the pages brittle with age. This is your family line. Names, dates, executions. 300 years of systematic genocide documented in meticulous detail. Celine took the book with trembling hands. The first page showed a family tree. Her eyes traced the branches downward, seeing name after name marked with a single word. Executed, executed, executed. Until the tree narrowed to a single line. Her mother's name, then hers, last of the bloodline. Kale stood beside her, or so they thought. Why save these records? If the council wanted to erase us, why keep proof? Because they're wolves. Pride matters. They wanted to remember what they'd accomplished, wanted future generations to know how completely they'd crushed a threat. He pulled down another volume. This one documents the executions themselves, methods, locations, witnesses. Read it if you want to know exactly what they did to your people. Celine's stomach turned. I don't. Smart. Kale returned the book to its shelf. But remember, it exists. Remember that if they win, your death will be another entry in that ledger. Another name marked executed. Another bloodline, finally, completely erased. She closed the family history book. The pages felt like they weighed more than stone. Tomorrow night, I stand before them. Tomorrow night, you remind them why their ancestors were right to be afraid. They stood in silence among the graves of her people, the dead histories pressing down on them from every shelf. Finally, Celine spoke. If I lose control, if the power takes over and I hurt innocent wolves, then I'll stop you. Kale's voice was firm. That's my job, to make sure you're strong enough to survive, but controlled enough not to become the monster they claim you are. And if you can't stop me, then Marcus will kill us both. The certainty in his voice should have been frightening. Instead, it felt almost comforting. Someone had a plan. Someone was prepared for the worst possible outcome. She wasn't alone in this. Why? She looked at him in the torchlight. You could serve the council, could rise higher in their ranks. Why risk everything for an Omega you didn't know existed until 3 days ago? Kale was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried something she'd never heard before. Regret. Because someone should have saved your mother, and they didn't. And I'm tired of standing by while the council erases everyone who threatens their control. He met her eyes. Maybe I can't change the past, but I can try to change what happens tomorrow. It wasn't a declaration of loyalty, wasn't a promise of protection. It was simply truth, offered without decoration. Celine nodded once. Then let's make sure she didn't die for nothing. Cas. The night before the ceremony, Celine couldn't sleep. She stood at the window in Kael's quarters, watching the moon rise over the castle. Somewhere out there, the council was gathering. Wolves were taking their positions. The entire kingdom was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the Omega who made Alphas kneel finally stood before judgment. The door opened behind her. Kael entered, carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. Can't sleep either. It wasn't a question. Every time I close my eyes, I see that hall. Everyone on their knees, the fear in their eyes. Good. Remember that. Remember that they're afraid of you now. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a dress. Not servant's clothes, something finer. Still simple, still dark, but made of fabric that actually fit instead of hanging loose. For tomorrow. You stand before them as sovereign, not Omega. Appearance matters. Celine took the dress, the material soft under her fingers. Where did you get this? I have resources. He moved to the window beside her. The council meets at sunset. They'll bring you before them in chains, make it look like you're a prisoner being sentenced. But I am a prisoner, only if you believe you are. Kael's eyes reflected the moonlight. Tomorrow, you walk into that chamber and you show them exactly what they tried to bury. Not with violence, not with revenge, just with presence. With the absolute certainty that you have the right to exist. And if they try to execute me anyway, then we find out how many wolves are ready for revolution. The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and thrilling and terrifying. Celine looked at him, really looked at him. The scars, the exhaustion held at bay through pure will, the rage buried so deep it had become foundation. You're not doing this just for me. No. His voice was quiet. I'm doing this because the system is broken. Has been for centuries. You're just the catalyst that might finally shatter it. He turned away from the window. Get some rest. Tomorrow changes everything. After he left, Celine stood alone in the darkness, holding a dress that represented something she'd never been allowed to be. Tomorrow, she would walk into that chamber. Tomorrow, she would face the wolves who'd murdered her bloodline. Tomorrow, she would either die or become something the world hadn't seen in 300 years. She pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling the cold seep into her skin. Somewhere in the castle below, Karis was probably celebrating. The council was probably strategizing. Marcus was probably preparing his weapons in case everything went wrong. And her mother's name sat in those archives, marked executed beside hundreds of others who'd been erased for being different. Celine closed her eyes and reached for that place inside her chest. The power came easily now. Familiar as breathing, dangerous as wildfire. Tomorrow, they would try to make her kneel, and she would show them that some wolves were born to rise. Sunset came too fast. Celine stood in Kael's quarters wearing the dark dress he'd given her, her hands steady for the first time in days. Outside, the castle was alive with movement. Wolves gathering, voices echoing through stone corridors, the entire kingdom converging on the ceremonial chamber where judgment would be passed. The door opened. Marcus entered first, followed by Kael. Both wore their formal military dress, black coats marked with the insignia of the Black Fang Legion. Both looked like they were preparing for war instead of a council meeting. It's time. Kael's voice was flat. They're waiting. Celine turned from the window. No chains. Not yet. Marcus's expression was grim. The council wants you presented as a prisoner, but the commander convinced them to let you walk in under your own power. Makes better theater. How thoughtful. Celine's voice carried an edge she hadn't possessed 3 days ago. Kael studied her for a moment. Remember what we practiced. The pressure comes from refusal, not rage. You walk in there calm, controlled. You only show them what you are if they force your hand, and if they try to execute me immediately. Then we improvise. Not exactly a solid plan, Plans rarely survive first contact with reality. Kale moved toward the door. But you're not the same terrified Omega who stumbled into that training chamber 3 nights ago. Trust what you've become. He said it with such certainty that Celine almost believed him. They walked through corridors that grew progressively more ornate. Banners hung from the ceilings. Guards lined the walls at regular intervals, their eyes tracking Celine with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Word had spread fast. Everyone knew what she was now. Everyone had an opinion about whether she should live or die. The ceremonial chamber doors stood 20 feet tall, carved from ancient wood and bound with iron. 2 guards pulled them open as Kyle approached, the hinges groaning like something waking from a long sleep. The noise hit first. Hundreds of wolves packed the chamber, their voices creating a wall of sound that made Celine's ears ring. The space was massive, circular, with tiered seating rising toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations that no longer existed. At the center sat the Alpha Council on their stone thrones, 12 wolves who'd ruled through fear and tradition for longer than Celine had been alive. Chancellor Morvain occupied the highest seat. His white beard was braided with silver thread, his eyes sharp despite his age. To his right sat Alpha Torvin, massive and scarred, looking like violence given shape. To his left, Alpha Lissa, beautiful and cold, her gaze calculating as it swept the room. And in the third row, barely visible behind the primary council members, sat Karis's father, Commander Veyron of the Iron Fang clan. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes found Celine immediately and held her with the intensity of a predator marking prey. The crowd's noise died as Kyle led Celine to the center of the chamber, a circular space marked by ancient symbols carved into the floor, the Judgment Circle, where wolves had been sentenced for 300 years. Celine stopped at the edge of the circle. Kyle and Marcus took positions on either side of her, their presence both protective and symbolic. Chancellor Morvain rose from his throne. His voice carried across the chamber without effort, trained by decades of commanding crowds. Celine Vera, you stand before this council to answer for actions taken during the Blood Moon Gathering 3 nights past. Actions that disrupted sacred ceremony and threatened every wolf in attendance. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Celine kept her expression neutral. Her heart was hammering, but she forced her breathing to stay calm, forced her hands not to shake. You are accused of wielding unlawful power, of commanding alphas against their will, of representing a bloodline deemed too dangerous to exist within civilized wolf society. Morvain paused, letting the weight of those words settle. How do you answer these charges? Celine's voice came out steadier than she expected. I answer that I defended myself against public humiliation and assault, that my bloodline isn't a crime, that existing isn't unlawful just because you fear what I represent. The crowd erupted, shouts of agreement mixed with calls for her execution. Morvain raised a hand and silence fell like a blade. You speak of defense, yet 50 wolves collapsed under your power. Alphas knelt against their will. That is not defense. That is domination. They were laughing at me. Celine's voice hardened, mocking me while one of your precious betas assaulted me in front of hundreds. I didn't strike anyone, didn't harm anyone. I simply stopped accepting abuse. Alpha Torvin leaned forward. You force submission through supernatural means. That is an act of war against the natural hierarchy. Natural? Celine met his eyes. There's nothing natural about your hierarchy. You built it on genocide, on murdering every wolf whose existence threatened your control. The chamber went absolutely silent. Morvain's expression darkened. You speak of things you don't understand, child. I understand that you killed my mother. Celine's voice rang out clear and cold. Burned her alive when I was 6 years old because she carried the same bloodline you're condemning me for. I understand that you've spent 3 centuries erasing anyone who remembered that your power isn't inevitable, that it's constructed, maintained through fear. She took a step forward into the judgment circle. So yes, Chancellor, I wielded power you deemed unlawful, power that predates every seat in this chamber, power that your ancestors couldn't destroy no matter how many of my people they murdered. Kale's hand moved to his weapon, subtle but ready. Marcus shifted his weight, preparing for violence. Alpha. Lissa stood, her voice cutting through the tension like ice. The child speaks treason. She admits to being sovereign, admits to possessing the very power that nearly destroyed our territories centuries ago. Nearly destroyed. Celine's laugh was bitter. Is that what you teach in your histories? That we were the threat, not the wolves who couldn't tolerate anyone more powerful than themselves? You know nothing of those times. I know you've been lying about them ever since. Morvaine's hand slammed down on his throne's armrest. Enough. This council has heard sufficient evidence. We will now vote on the prisoner's fate. Already, Kale's voice was sharp. She's barely spoken in her defense. She's admitted to everything we accused her of. Torvin's smile was cruel. What more defense is needed? The council members began to murmur among themselves, a choreographed dance of political positioning that had clearly been decided before Celine ever entered the chamber. This was never a trial. It was theater. They'd already decided she would die. This ceremony was just to make it look legitimate. Celine felt the power stirring inside her chest, responding to the injustice, to the trap closing around her. Her wolf snarled, demanding she fight back, demanding she show these pompous alphas exactly what happened when they tried to cage a sovereign. Not yet. Kael's voice was barely a whisper. Hold. She held. The council's murmuring stopped. Morvaine stood again, his expression grave. This council has reached a decision. Celine Vera, you are hereby sentenced to execution for crimes against the wolf territories. The sentence will be carried out. The chamber doors exploded inward. Wolves poured through the opening, armed and moving with military precision. Not guards, not council forces. Independent pack members wearing colors from a dozen different clans. And at their head walked someone Celine recognized. Commander Veyron, Karis's father. His coat bore the Iron Fang sigil, but his expression carried something she hadn't expected. Fury. Not directed at her, directed at the council. Chancellor Morvaine, Veyron's voice boomed across the chamber. This trial is a sham, and you know it. Commander Veyron. Morvaine's face flushed. You overstep your authority. My authority comes from the 17 clans who sent me here to demand actual justice instead of political execution. Veyron moved down the center aisle, his wolves spreading out around the chamber's perimeter. The crowd was frozen, caught between confusion and fear. Celine stared at the man who'd sired the beta that had humiliated her, tried to understand what was happening, why he was defending her. Kael's hand remained on his weapon, but his expression had shifted to something calculating. You want to execute this girl for being sovereign? Veyron stopped at the edge of the judgment circle. Fine, but let's be honest about why. Not because she's dangerous, because she's proof that your authority isn't absolute, that there are bloodlines older and more powerful than your manufactured hierarchy. Torvin was on his feet now. You dare defend an abomination. I dare demand transparency. Veyron's eyes swept the council. How many wolves here know that the sovereign bloodline was eliminated because they refused to bow to pack politics, because they believed in merit over inheritance, because they threatened every alpha who ruled through fear instead of respect? This is heresy. Lissa's voice was shaking. This is history. Veyron turned to face the crowd. History your council has been burying for 300 years, but some of us remember, some of us have been waiting for this moment. He looked directly at Celine. The moment when someone finally survived long enough to remind us what we lost. Celine's mind was racing. This didn't make sense. Veyron's daughter had triggered her awakening through cruelty. Why would he defend her now? Unless it hadn't been an accident. Unless Karis had been sent specifically to push Celine until something broke. To force the dormant bloodline to surface in front of hundreds of witnesses. But why? Morvaine's voice was cold as death. Commander Veyron, you are relieved of your position effective immediately. Your wolves will stand down or be considered traitors to the council. My wolves answer to their clans, not your council. Veyron smiled, and it was a terrible expression. And those clans are tired of watching you consolidate power while pretending to serve the greater good. This is sedition. This is revolution. The word hung in the air like a declaration of war. Then several things happened at once. Half the council guards moved to intercept Veyron's forces. The crowd erupted into chaos, wolves scattering or choosing sides. Kael grabbed Celine's arm, pulling her back from the center of the judgment circle. and Marcus drew his blade and pressed it against Kael's throat. Celine's world stopped. Marcus's expression was apologetic, but his hand was steady. The blade drew a thin line of blood. "I'm sorry, Commander. The Council paid better." Kael's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise from a man who prided himself on reading every angle. "Marcus." His voice was calm despite the blade at his throat. "Think about what you're doing." "I have." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I've thought about it for 6 months, ever since they approached me, ever since they offered me enough gold to buy my family's freedom from debt." He looked at Celine and there was genuine regret in his eyes. "She was never supposed to survive the training. You were supposed to push her too hard. Let the power consume her. Then I'd kill you both and the Council would reward my loyalty. But you didn't." Kael's voice was soft. "You let her live. You made her strong." Marcus's hand trembled slightly. "Strong enough that they're terrified now. Strong enough that Commander Veyron thinks he can use her to overthrow the entire system." He pressed the blade deeper. Kael's blood ran down his neck. "I can't let that happen. My family needs the Council's protection, needs the gold, needs everything they promised me." Celine stood frozen, watching the man who'd trained her press steel against the throat of the only wolf who'd tried to save her. This was betrayal at its purest. Not from an enemy, from someone who'd stood beside them, someone they'd trusted. Around them, the chamber had descended into violence. Veyron's wolves fought council guards. Alphas chose sides. The crowd screamed and scattered, but in their small pocket of space, everything was perfectly still. Kael's eyes met Celine's. No fear there, just calculation. "Run." His voice was barely audible. "I can't leave you. You can. You will. Marcus won't chase you. His job is to kill me and collect his reward." Marcus's expression twisted. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Celine felt the power rising in her chest, responding to the threat, to the rage, to the absolute betrayal of watching someone she'd trusted reveal themselves as bought. She could command Marcus to stop, could force every wolf in this chamber to their knees, could burn this entire corrupted system to the ground. But Kael's eyes held a warning. Not here. Not like this. The moment she unleashed that power in the middle of a riot, she'd prove every fear the Council had. She'd become the weapon they claimed she was. She'd become the monster. "Marcus." Celine's voice was steady. "How much did they pay you?" "Enough." His eyes wouldn't meet hers. Enough to matter. "Was it worth it? Selling us out, selling yourself?" "Yes." The word came out like a confession. "Because my daughter gets to live now. My family gets to survive. That's worth more than your revolution or his honor or any of this." He was crying. The blade at Kael's throat never wavered, but tears ran down Marcus's face. "I'm sorry. But I'd do it again. I'd do worse, because they're mine and you're not." The honesty of it was somehow more terrible than simple greed would have been. Celine understood in that moment something she'd been too naive to grasp before. That loyalty wasn't absolute. That honor bent when survival demanded it. That every wolf in this chamber would betray anything if the price was right and the threat was great enough. This was the world she'd been born into. Not noble, not fair, just brutal and transactional and endlessly cruel. Kael's hand moved. It was subtle. A shift of weight, a flex of muscle. Marcus saw it a second too late. Kael twisted, sacrificing skin to the blade as he moved inside Marcus's guard. His elbow caught Marcus in the throat. His other hand seized the blade arm and twisted hard enough that bone cracked. Marcus stumbled back, gasping. The blade clattered to the floor. Kael kicked it away and stood there bleeding, his expression colder than Celine had ever seen it. "You had a choice." His voice was quiet. "You chose." Marcus clutched his broken arm, tears still streaming. "I know. Then live with it." Kael turned to Celine. "We're leaving. Now." The chamber was chaos. Veyron's forces had pushed the council guards back, but more were coming. The council members had fled to a protected section, surrounded by their elite warriors. Wolves were dying on the marble floor, blood spreading across ancient symbols. And through it all, Veyron stood watching, not fighting, just observing, waiting to see what Celine would do. She met his eyes across the chamber and saw calculation there. Ambition. He didn't want to save her. He wanted to use her. To harness her power for his own political coup. Everyone wanted something from her. No one wanted her to simply exist. Kale grabbed her hand. They ran. Not toward the main doors where fighting was thickest, toward a side entrance that led to servant corridors. The passages she'd spent her whole life navigating invisibly. They burst through and found themselves in narrow stone hallways lit by failing torches. Behind them, shouting, boots on stone. Pursuit. This way. Kyle led her through a maze of turns. His neck was still bleeding, but he moved like injury was irrelevant. Where are we going? Anywhere but here. His voice was tight. The council will hunt you. Veyron will try to capture you. Marcus will tell them everything about your training. We can't run forever. We can run long enough to figure out a plan that doesn't end with you dead or collared. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a figure waiting in the shadows. Kara stepped into the torchlight, alone. Her dress was torn. Bruises marked her face. She looked like she'd fought her way through the chaos specifically to find this hallway. Going somewhere, Omega. Celine's power surged. Kale's hand tightened on hers in warning. Karis raised both hands slowly. I'm not here to fight. Then move. Kale's voice was flat. My father sent me. Karis's words came fast. He knew the council would try to execute you, knew they'd betray any promise of fair trial. He's been planning this coup for months, planning to use Celine as the catalyst. Yes. Karis's expression was difficult to read. He needed proof that sovereign bloodlines still existed, needed someone powerful enough to unite the dissenting clans. So he sent me to trigger your awakening. You humiliated me. Celine's voice was cold, in front of hundreds. I know. Karis's voice shook. I hated every second of it, but my father said it was necessary. Said you'd never access your power unless you were pushed to breaking. So you broke me on purpose. I broke you so you could survive what came next. Karis took a step closer. The council was always going to kill you, Celine, whether your power awakened or not. At least this way you have a chance to be your father's weapon, a chance to change everything. Karis's eyes were desperate. The hierarchy is broken. Omega's treated like trash, betas caught between serving alphas, or becoming like you, invisible. My father wants to rebuild the system with sovereign bloodlines at the top, natural rulers instead of the strongest bullies. Celine laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. And you think that's better, trading one set of masters for another. It's different when the masters actually care about more than power. Is it? Or does your father just want to be the one in control? Karis flinched. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Multiple groups. Council forces. Veyron's wolves. Maybe others. They were running out of time. Kale's voice cut through. Where does this corridor lead? Karis hesitated. Then her expression hardened. The eastern gate. It's unguarded right now. My father made sure of it. You can escape into the forest. In exchange for what? In exchange for Celine considering his offer. Karis looked directly at her. Join us. Help us overthrow the council. Become what you were born to be. A puppet with a crown. A queen with actual power to change things. Celine stared at the beta who'd tormented her, who'd triggered her awakening, who was offering salvation that tasted like another cage. Why should I trust anything you say? Because I'm giving you a choice. Karis's voice cracked. The council won't. They'll just kill you. At least with my father, you get to decide what kind of ruler you want to be. The footsteps were close now, voices shouting, swords being drawn. Kale pulled Celine toward the corridor Karis had indicated. They ran, leaving the beta standing alone in the torchlight. Behind them, Karis's voice called out one last time. He's waiting in the forest. Make the right choice, Celine. Then the pursuit reached her, and her voice was lost in shouts and chaos. Kyle and Celine burst through the eastern gate into cold night air. The forest stretched before them, dark and ancient. Behind them, the castle burned with torchlight and violence and wolves tearing each other apart over power and politics and her. They ran. Branches tore at Celine's dress. Roots tried to trip her. The forest was alive with sound. Nightbirds startled into flight. Small creatures fleeing the predators crashing through their territory. Kyle's breathing was labored, blood loss catching up to him. How far? Celine gasped. Far enough. They broke into a clearing and stopped. Commander Veyron stood waiting with 50 armed wolves surrounding him. His expression was patient, almost kind. Celine Vera, his voice carried across the clearing. You've run far enough. Kale moved in front of her, hand on his weapon, despite being outnumbered and injured. She's not going with you. That's not your choice, Commander Draven. Veyron's smile was gentle. It's hers. He looked past Kyle to Celine. I'm offering you something the Council never would. Recognition, protection, a place at the table instead of under it. Help me rebuild the territories, and I'll make sure no wolf ever looks at you like you're less again. Celine's power was thrumming inside her chest, begging to be released. She could feel Veyron's authority pressing against her. Not overwhelming, just present. Alpha dominance meeting sovereign refusal. And what do you get? Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. A kingdom that works, where power flows from natural hierarchy instead of political manipulation, where sovereign bloodlines guide us back to what we were before fear took over. You want me to be your figurehead, your proof of concept. I want you to be what you are. The smile widened. Everything else is just logistics. Around them, his wolves stood ready, not threatening, just present, inescapable. Kale's hand tightened on his weapon. We can fight our way out. You'll die. Veyron's tone was a matter of fact, and she'll be captured anyway, or killed by Council forces right behind you. As if summoned, torches appeared at the forest edge, Council guards pouring into the trees, hunting. They were surrounded, trapped between Veyron's ambition and the Council's fear, between being used or being executed, between choosing who would control her or dying free. Veyron held out his hand. Work with me. The Council burns tonight regardless. At least this way you survive to see what comes after. Celine looked at that offered hand, looked at Kyle bleeding and defiant beside her, looked at the wolves closing in from all directions. She'd spent 3 days learning to control her power, learning to be strong instead of small, but strength without freedom was just another cage. And she was so tired of cages. The power inside her chest cracked open, not violently, not explosively, just a steady pressure building like a storm that had finally decided to break. Veyron's expression shifted, understanding replacing patience. Don't. His voice carried warning now. You're not strong enough yet to fight all of us. Watch me. The pressure exploded outward. Every wolf in the clearing collapsed. Veyron, his 50 warriors, Kale beside her, the Council guards at the forest edge, all of them driven to their knees by an authority so absolute it bypassed conscious thought and seized the wolf brain directly. Celine stood alone in a forest full of prostrated predators, her power finally unleashed without restraint, and felt nothing but hollow victory. Because even now, even with all of them on their knees, she was still alone, still hunted, still a thing to be used or destroyed depending on who got to her first. The power wavered, her control slipping as exhaustion crashed over her. Veyron looked up from his knees, blood trailing from his nose. Impressive, but you can't hold this forever. He was right. She could feel it already fraying at the edges. She'd proven her strength, proven her power, but power without purpose was just destruction waiting to happen. Kale's voice was strained, fighting against the pressure holding him down. Celine, whatever you're planning, do it fast. She didn't have a plan, didn't have allies, didn't have anywhere to run that wolves wouldn't follow. All she had was this moment, this choice. Submit to Veyron and become a puppet queen. Surrender to the Council and die. Or run alone into a world that would hunt her until she either broke or became the monster they feared. The pressure holding everyone down intensified as her panic spiked. Wolves cried out. Blood began to trickle from eyes and noses as the command pushed past safe limits. She was hurting them, all of them, just by existing at full power. Maybe they were right. Maybe sovereign bloodlines were too dangerous. Maybe her mother had died for good reason. No. The thought came from somewhere deep. Somewhere that remembered who she'd been 3 days ago and understood who she'd become. She wasn't dangerous because of what she was. She was dangerous because they'd spent her entire life trying to bury what she was. They'd created this situation, built this trap, forced her into corners until violence became survival. Celine released the pressure. Everyone gasped, sucking in air like they'd been drowning. She looked at Veyron, then at the Council forces gathering at the forest edge, then at Kyle struggling to his feet beside her. I'm not joining anyone. Her voice carried across the clearing. I'm not your queen, Veyron. Not your victim counsel. Not your cause or your threat or your weapon. Then what are you? Veyron's voice was rough. Celine met his eyes. I'm the thing you should have left buried, and now I'm done asking permission to exist. She turned and ran. Not toward the castle. Not toward Veyron's forces. Deeper into the forest where wolves rarely ventured. Into the wild places where hierarchy meant nothing and survival was all that mattered. Behind her, chaos erupted again, Veyron shouting orders, council forces engaging his wolves, Kyle's voice calling her name. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because she finally understood something that 3 days of training hadn't taught her. Power wasn't about controlling others. It was about refusing to be controlled. And she would die free before she lived as anyone's weapon. The forest swallowed her. Darkness absolute. Cold seeping through her torn dress. Blood from scratches mixing with sweat and tears she couldn't stop. Behind her, the sounds of fighting faded into distance. Ahead, nothing but wilderness and uncertainty. Celine ran until her legs gave out, collapsed against an ancient tree in a part of the forest that smelled like centuries of decay and growth and wild things that didn't remember civilization. Her power was guttering like a dying flame. Her body was breaking down from exhaustion. Her mind was fracturing from 3 days of impossible transformation. She'd escaped, but she had nowhere to go, no allies, no resources, no plan beyond surviving the next hour. The moon rose through the canopy above, illuminating her face, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. Hunting, always hunting. Celine closed her eyes and wondered if her mother had felt this same crushing despair right before they burned her. This same understanding that strength meant nothing when you faced the world alone. That maybe some bloodlines were meant to end. That maybe extinction was mercy. The cold woke her. Not the gentle cold of autumn mornings, but the brutal cold of a body shutting down. Celine's eyes opened to gray dawn filtering through branches above. Frost covered her torn dress. Her fingers were blue. Somewhere during the night she'd stopped shivering, which meant her body had given up trying to generate heat. She was dying. The thought came with strange clarity. No panic. No fear. Just recognition that this was how it ended. Not in a grand execution before the council. Not as a puppet queen for Veyron's ambitions. Just alone in the forest, frozen and forgotten. Her mother had burned. She would freeze. Poetic in a terrible way. She tried to move, and her body refused. Muscles locked. Blood moving too slow. The power inside her chest was barely a flicker now, dying along with everything else. Footsteps crunched through frost nearby. Celine's eyes tracked movement, but her head wouldn't turn. A figure emerged from the trees, moving carefully. Not rushing, just methodical. Kale dropped to his knees beside her, his breath creating clouds in the freezing air. You ran far. His voice was rough. Took me all night to find your trail. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her. The fabric was warm from his body heat. It felt like fire against her frozen skin. Don't! Celine's voice came out barely audible. They'll find you. They're still fighting each other back at the castle. Veyron's forces engaged the council. Everyone's too busy killing each other to hunt us right now. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Started walking. Where? She couldn't finish the sentence. Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can figure out what comes next. There is no next. Her head lolled against his shoulder. I'm done, Kyle. I have nothing left. You have more than you think. He adjusted his grip. You just need to remember why you started fighting in the first place. I started fighting because I had no choice. No. You started fighting because you refused to accept what they told you to be. That doesn't stop just because it gets hard. His neck was still bandaged where Marcus's blade had cut him. Blood had seeped through during his night-long search. He was injured and exhausted and had every reason to abandon her. But he hadn't. Why? The word came out cracked. Why keep protecting me? Kale was silent for a long moment. His boots crunched through frozen leaves. Dawn light made shadows dance across his scarred face. Because someone should have protected your mother. And they didn't. And I'm tired of watching the wrong wolves die while the monsters keep their thrones. He looked down at her. You're not a weapon, Celine. You're proof that their system was always broken. That strength and bloodline don't equal worth. That maybe we've been doing this backwards for 3 centuries. That's treason. Only if we lose. Despite everything, she almost smiled. They walked for hours. Kael never stopped, never complained, just carried her through forest that grew progressively wilder until the trees were ancient and the ground was unmarked by wolf passage. This was the deep territory. The places wolves avoided because civilization ended and something older took over. A cave appeared in the side of a rock formation. Small entrance. Defensible. Kyle carried her inside, and the temperature immediately rose. The cave went back further than the entrance suggested, opening into a chamber lit by cracks in the stone above. He set her down carefully against the wall and immediately began gathering materials. Dead branches. Dry moss. Within minutes, he had a fire burning, the flames driving back the cold. Celine watched him move. Efficient, controlled. Even injured and hunted, he maintained that terrible competence. You planned this. Her voice was stronger now, warmth returning. You knew where this cave was, had it scouted weeks ago. Emergency fallback position. Kale sat across the fire from her. I've been expecting things to collapse for a while. Just didn't know it would happen this fast. Because of me. Because the council was always going to tear itself apart. You just accelerated the timeline. He pulled out a small pack she hadn't noticed, produced dried meat and a water skin, handed them to her. Eat. You're no good to anyone dead. The food tasted like survival, like maybe she'd see tomorrow after all. Kael watched the fire, his expression distant. Marcus was at the castle when I left, gave himself up to Veyron's forces. Is he alive? For now. Veyron has him in custody. Wants to make an example about the price of betraying the revolution. He said revolution like it tasted bitter. You don't believe in what Veyron's trying to do. I believe in tearing down the council. Kael's eyes met hers across the flames. I don't believe in replacing one corrupt system with another. Veyron talks about natural hierarchy and sovereign guidance, but what he really wants is control, just wrapped in prettier language. So, what do you believe in? That was the question, wasn't it? Celine watched him struggle with the answer. This cold, scarred commander who'd spent 3 days training her and risked everything to protect her. What did wolves like him fight for when every system was rotten? I believe people deserve better than what we've given them. His voice was quiet. I believe Omega doesn't mean worthless, and Alpha doesn't mean worthy. I believe my second-in-command shouldn't have had to choose between loyalty and his family's survival. He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling. I believe if I help you survive this, maybe you'll build something different. Something that doesn't require genocide to maintain. That's a lot of faith in someone you barely know. I know you held power absolute over 200 wolves and chose to release them instead of crush them. That tells me everything I need. The fire crackled between them. Outside, wind howled through the forest. The world was tearing itself apart over politics and power, and her. Kael. She waited until he looked at her. If we survive this, if somehow we win, what do we actually build? How do we fix centuries of broken? We start by admitting it's broken. That's further than the council ever got. It was such a simple statement, so obvious it hurt. But in a world where everyone pretended the hierarchy was natural law, even that admission was revolutionary. They'll come for us. Celine pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. Veyron, the council, everyone who sees me as threat or asset. I know. Kael stood and moved to the cave entrance, checking the forest beyond. That's why we don't wait for them to find us. What do you mean? His smile was sharp. We go back. Are you insane? The council wants me executed. Veyron wants me collared. Walking back into that is suicide. Hiding here is suicide. Just slower. Kael turned to face her. Right now, the castle is in chaos. Council forces fighting Veyron's wolves. No clear authority. That's when we strike. Strike how? I'm one person with power I barely control. You're a sovereign, the first in 3 centuries. And you have me. He crossed his arms. We go back. We end the council. We end Veyron's coup. And we give every wolf watching a choice about what comes after. That's impossible. Everything is until someone does it. He moved back to the fire and crouched beside her. 3 days ago, you were a servant who couldn't make eye contact with betas. Now you're the only thing both sides fear enough to fight over. You think that's not power. It's chaos. Chaos is opportunity. Kael's eyes were intense. The old system is crumbling. We can either let wolves like Veyron fill the vacuum, or we can offer something different, something built on choice instead of submission. Celine stared at him. This scarred commander with treason written in his eyes and revolution bleeding from every wound. You're serious. You want to start a war. We're already in a war. I just want to make sure the right side wins. And which side is that? Ours. The simplicity of it almost made her laugh. As if two fugitives could challenge an entire kingdom's power structure and win. As if choice and hope were sufficient weapons against 3 centuries of entrenched hierarchy. But what else did they have? Celine looked at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. The warmth had returned to her fingers. The power in her chest was no longer flickering but burning steady. She'd run into the forest expecting to die. Instead, she'd found the one wolf in the kingdom who believed she could live and mean something beyond threat or tool. How? She met Kael's eyes. Specifically, how do we win? We use the one advantage we have. His smile was predatory. Everyone thinks you're either with Veyron or running scared. Nobody expects you to walk back into the castle and challenge them all. Shock and power and truth. Kael moved closer. We expose what the council did to your bloodline. We show every wolf watching that the system was built on genocide. We give them a choice to be part of something different or go down with the old regime. And if they choose the old regime, then we fight. His voice was flat. And we win or we die. But at least we die trying to build something better instead of hiding until they hunt us down anyway. Outside, the sun had fully risen. The forest was bright with morning light and the promise of violence to come. Celine stood. Her legs were steady. Her body was recovering. The power inside her chest was awake and waiting. She thought about her mother burning, about 16 years living as nothing, about 3 days learning to refuse, about Marcus's betrayal and Veyron's ambition and the council's fear. She thought about every Omega who'd been dismissed, every wolf who'd been crushed for being different, every creature the hierarchy had ground down to maintain control, and she made a choice that terrified her more than death ever could. All right, her voice was steel. We go back. We end this. Kael's expression shifted, something like respect mixing with grim satisfaction. Then we need to move fast. Veyron's forces will be consolidating. The council will be regrouping. We have maybe 12 hours before someone establishes control. What's your plan? We rally the ones who don't want either option. Kael began extinguishing the fire. The soldiers tired of dying for corrupt alphas. The Omegas with nothing to lose. The betas caught between serving monsters or becoming them. You think they'll follow me? I think they'll follow the alternative. You're just the symbol. He looked at her seriously. But you need to be ready for what that means. Leading isn't just power. It's responsibility. It's making decisions that get people killed. It's carrying the weight of every wolf who believes in you when you're not sure you believe in yourself. Celine absorbed that. The magnitude of what he was asking. What she was agreeing to. I'm terrified. Good. Kael headed for the cave entrance. Terrified means you understand the stakes. Now let's make sure their fear was justified. They left the cave and moved through morning forest with purpose. Not running anymore. Hunting. Kael led them through paths he'd clearly memorized. Emergency routes, back channels, ways to move through territory without being seen by patrols. How long have you been planning rebellion? Celine kept pace beside him. Since I was 17 and watched an Omega get executed for stealing bread to feed her family. Since I realized every law was written to protect wolves who didn't need protection and punish wolves who had no other choice. His jaw was tight. I joined the military thinking I could change it from inside. Rose through ranks, became commander, and realized the whole system is poison. You can't fix it. You can only burn it down and start over. So you were waiting for someone like me. I was waiting for a catalyst. You just happened to be it. They crested a ridge and the castle came into view below. Even from this distance, the damage was visible. Smoke rising from sections, torches still burning from night battles. The whole structure looked wounded. Kael pulled out a small spyglass and surveyed the scene. Veyron holds the eastern section. Council forces retreated to the western wing. They're at a stalemate. How many dead? Too many. He lowered the glass. And it'll get worse before it gets better. Where do we enter? We don't. Not yet. Kale pointed to a structure separate from the main castle. The old arena. Public execution grounds. It's neutral territory right now. Both sides have agreed to meet there at sunset to discuss terms. They're negotiating. They're positioning. Veyron will demand the council surrender. The council will demand Veyron stand down. Neither will bend. The negotiation is theater for the wolves watching, so we interrupt the theater. We crash it. Kale's smile was dangerous. We walk in during their negotiation and offer a third option. No council, no Veyron, just reconstruction from the ground up with every wolf having a voice. They'll try to kill us immediately. Probably. That's why we need allies in place first. They spent the day moving through the territory surrounding the castle. Kael had contacts everywhere. Soldiers who were tired. Servants who'd seen too much. Wolves who'd lost family to the fighting. At each stop, his message was the same. Tonight, something changes. Be ready. He never promised victory, never offered certainty, just choice. And slowly, incredibly, wolves agreed. By sunset, they had maybe 50 committed. Not warriors, not alphas, just ordinary wolves who were tired of the system grinding them down. It won't be enough. Celine watched the ragtag group gather in a forest clearing near the arena. Veyron has hundreds. The council has their elite guard. Numbers aren't everything. Kale checked his weapons. We have you. We have truth. And we have nothing left to lose. That makes us more dangerous than any army. He looked at their gathered wolves. Most looked terrified. Some looked determined. All looked like they understood this might be suicide. When I signal, you enter the arena. Kale's voice carried across the clearing. Don't attack unless attacked. Just stand with Celine. Show both sides that there's another option, that wolves are choosing something different, and if they attack anyway. Someone called out. Then we fight, and we make them remember why they should have left the sovereign bloodline alone. The wolves absorbed this. Their fear was palpable, but so was their resolve. Celine moved among them, spoke to a few, learned their names. An Omega who'd lost her children to council enforcement. A Beta whose brother was executed for speaking against Alpha authority. A young soldier who'd watched his commander order the burning of a village that couldn't pay tribute. Each story was a wound. Each wolf was a reason this needed to end. Sunset arrived too fast. They moved through shadows toward the arena. The old structure loomed against the darkening sky. Circular walls built for spectacle and death. Torches ringed the upper levels. Both Veyron's forces and council guards lined the walls, weapons ready, staring at each other across neutral ground. In the center of the arena floor stood the principals. Veyron with his commanders, Chancellor Morvain with the remaining council members. Between them, a neutral space where negotiation was supposed to happen. Celine and Kael waited in the entrance tunnel. Their small force spread out behind them. The moment felt enormous. The kind of moment where history pivoted, ready. Kael's hand found hers. Brief pressure, then release. No, but let's do it anyway. His smile was quick and fierce. They stepped into the arena. The negotiation stopped. Every head turned. Silence fell like a blade. Celine walked toward the center, Kael at her side, their small force following. 50 wolves against hundreds. Insignificant by numbers. But the effect was immediate. Both Veyron and Morvain stared. The wolves lining the walls leaned forward. Everyone recognized what this meant. The sovereign had returned. Veyron recovered first. Celine. His voice was warm, pleased. I'm glad you've come to your senses. Join us. Help us rebuild. Morvain's face was pale. That creature should be in chains. Or dead. She's neither. Kael's voice cut across the arena. And she's not joining anyone. Celine stepped forward, alone now, into the space between the two powers that had been fighting over her corpse. I'm not here to choose sides. Her voice rang clear. I'm here to offer an alternative. There is no alternative. Morvain's hands shook with rage. You're a threat to every wolf in this kingdom. No. She met his eyes. I'm a threat to you, to your power, to the lie that hierarchy is natural law instead of constructed control. She turned to address the entire arena. 3 centuries ago, the council murdered my bloodline because they feared losing power. They burned my ancestors alive and erased their names from history. They convinced every wolf that sovereign authority was evil when really it was just inconvenient to alphas who wanted absolute control. Murmurs rippled through the watching wolves. And now you're fighting over whether I should be executed or enslaved, whether I'm weapon or threat. As if those are the only options. Varen stepped forward. I'm offering you respect. Recognition. You're offering me a collar made of gold instead of iron. Celine's voice was hard. You want to use my bloodline to legitimize your coup, to rebuild hierarchy with different wolves on top but the same power structure underneath. That's not... It's exactly what you're doing. She turned back to the full arena. They're both fighting to control me because I represent something they fear. Not my power. My choice. The possibility that wolves don't need masters, that we could build something based on merit and consent instead of fear and submission. This is sedition. Morvain's voice shook. Guards, seize her! Nobody moved. The council guards looked at each other. At Celine. At the 50 wolves who'd followed her into this arena. At the truth bleeding from every word she spoke. She's right. A voice from the council's side. A guard stepped forward. Younger. Scarred. I watched them execute my father for questioning alpha authority. Called him a traitor. But he was just asking why Omegas get killed for stealing bread, while alphas steal territories and call it conquest. More voices joined, from both sides. Wolves stepping forward, breaking ranks. I lost my sister to their justice. They burned our village for refusing tribute. I've killed for the council and I don't even know why anymore. The trickle became a flood. Wolves abandoning their positions. Moving toward the center, toward Celine, toward the possibility that maybe things could be different. Varen's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. The hierarchy exists for a reason. Without structure, we descend into chaos. We're already in chaos. Celine's power was rising now, not attacking, just present. Authority without violence. We've been in chaos for 3 centuries. You just called it order because you were on top. She looked at every wolf in the arena. I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm asking you to choose what you want to be part of. The old system that grinds down anyone different, Veyron's new system that replaces one set of masters with another, or something we build together, where Omega doesn't mean worthless and power doesn't mean tyranny. The arena was completely silent now. Hundreds of wolves making calculations, weighing centuries of conditioning against the possibility of something better. Morvain moved, fast for his age. A blade appeared in his hand. He lunged at Celine with the desperate violence of a wolf who'd lost control and could only think to destroy what threatened him. Kael intercepted. Their blades met with a sound like breaking bone. Then everything exploded into violence. Council loyalists attacked. Veyron's forces defended. The wolves who'd broken ranks fought to protect Celine. The arena became a whirlwind of steel and blood and screaming. Celine stood in the center and felt the power inside her demanding release. Demanding she crush everyone. End the threat. Become the weapon they feared. No. She pushed the power out differently. Not attacking, not crushing, just a pressure that made violence harder. That made wolves hesitate before killing. That bought seconds for choice instead of instinct. It wasn't control. It was interference. And it was harder than anything she'd ever done. Around her, the battle raged. Kael fought Morvain with brutal efficiency. Marcus appeared from somewhere, broken arm bound, fighting against council guards who'd once been his comrades. The wolves who'd followed Celine defended a perimeter around her, and slowly, impossibly, the violence began to stop. Not because anyone won, because wolves on both sides started lowering weapons, started seeing each other, started questioning whether dying for the old order was worth it when something different was possible. Veyron watched his revolution crumble. Morvain watched his council dissolve. And Celine stood between them, holding power absolute, but refusing to use it as they expected. The fighting stopped. The arena floor was covered in blood and wounded and wolves who'd made different choices. Kael stood over Morvain, blade at the Chancellor's throat. Mercy or justice? Your call. Celine looked at the old wolf who'd ordered her mother's execution, who'd tried to erase her bloodline, who represented everything wrong with the system. She could kill him, should kill him. Every instinct demanded it. Instead, she spoke. Trial. Public. Let every wolf see what you did and judge whether you deserve mercy. Kale hesitated, then nodded. Bound him. She turned to Veyron. And you. The commander stood tall despite his defeat. I wanted to give you power. You wanted to give yourself legitimacy. She moved closer. I'm not your weapon. I'm not your queen. If you want to be part of what comes next, you get one vote like everyone else. Veyron's jaw clenched. Then he bowed his head. Not submission. Acknowledgement. One vote. I accept. The arena was completely silent now, hundreds of wolves watching, waiting to see what came next. Celine looked at all of them, the wounded, the terrified, the hopeful, the angry. These were her people now, not because she'd conquered them, because she'd offered them choice. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. Tonight we tend our wounded and count our dead. And anyone who doesn't want to be part of this can leave. No punishment, no judgment, just go. She took a breath. But if you stay, you're choosing something different. Something harder than submission, but better than the alternative. You're choosing to build a kingdom where worth isn't determined by rank, and survival doesn't require becoming smaller. The words hung in the air. Then someone started beating their chest. Ancient wolf salute. Not submission, recognition. Another joined, then another, until the entire arena thundered with the sound of wolves choosing. Celine stood in the center of it all, this Omega who'd become sovereign, surrounded by wolves who'd decided to try building something better. And above them, the moon rose full and red. Blood moon, like the gathering where this had started. But different now, everything was different. Kael moved beside her, bleeding from a dozen wounds but standing. We did it. We started it. Celine looked at the arena full of wolves. The hard part comes next. Building is always harder than destroying. Then it's a good thing we're used to hard. His smile was tired but genuine. Around them, wolves began helping wounded, sorting bodies. The arena that had been built for execution was becoming something else, proof that change was possible even in the darkest places. Celine felt the power inside her chest, still burning, still dangerous, but under control now. Not because she'd mastered it, but because she'd learned to use it without becoming the monster. A commotion near the entrance, wolves parting, someone moving through the crowd with authority. Karis emerged. Her dress was torn. Blood marked her face. She looked like she'd fought her way through hell to get here. She stopped in front of Celine. Their eyes met. Then Karis dropped to one knee. Not forced, chosen. My father wanted to use you, she raised her head. I'm asking if you'll let me help you instead. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Karis's voice was steady. I humiliated you, triggered your awakening for political purposes, hurt you because my father said it was necessary. Then why are you here? Because I've spent my whole life being what I was told to be. And I'm tired. Karis gestured to the arena. You're offering something different. I want to be part of that, even if I don't deserve it. Celine looked at this beta who'd tortured her, who'd started everything, who was now asking for redemption. The old Celine would have held grudges, would have needed revenge, but that Celine had died in the forest. This one understood that building something better required accepting that everyone was trying to survive in a broken system, that cruelty came from pain as often as malice. Stand. Celine held out her hand. You want to help rebuild. Start by helping heal the wounded. Prove through actions what your words promise. Karis took her hand, rose. Something like hope flickered in her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We might all be dead by next week. Then I'll die trying to build something better than what my father wanted. It was strange. This Omega and this Beta, who'd started as tormentor and victim, now standing as allies. Proof that the system had poisoned everyone and healing required all of them. The night deepened. Wolves worked through darkness to turn the execution arena into something resembling hope. Kael coordinated medical care. Veyron's forces helped despite their failed coup. Council survivors worked alongside wolves they'd oppressed. It was messy and imperfect, and occasionally arguments broke out. But nobody was dying, nobody was being executed, and that was progress. Celine stood on the arena's edge, watching, and felt the magnitude of what they'd started. This wasn't victory. This was barely survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, wolves who rejected change, external threats, the crushing weight of expectations she couldn't possibly meet. But tonight, they'd proven something impossible could happen. That was enough. Kael appeared beside her. You should rest. Tomorrow we face whatever comes next. Tomorrow I become something I don't know how to be. Then learn. His voice was gentle. You learn to fight in 3 days. You can learn to lead. What if I fail? Then we fail together. He looked at the arena full of wolves. But at least we'll fail trying to build instead of maintain. That counts for something. Does it? Ask me again in a year. If we're still alive. Deal. They stood in comfortable silence watching wolves work. Enemies becoming allies, victims becoming builders. The whole structure of their world reshaping itself one choice at a time. Movement in the shadows beyond the arena caught Celine's attention. Figures watching from the forest. Too many to be scouts. Kael saw them too. His hand moved to his weapon. We've got company. The figures emerged into torchlight. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Wolves from territories they hadn't even contacted. Packs from the furthest reaches. All converging on the castle. All coming to see if the rumors were true. If the sovereign bloodline had really returned. If change was really possible. They stood at the forest edge. Waiting. An army of observers. Witnesses to whatever happened next. Celine looked at Kael. This is bigger than us. It was always bigger than us. He stepped forward. We just started it. He raised his voice to carry across the arena. To everyone listening, the old system is dead. The new one hasn't been born yet. We're in the space between, and everyone here gets to decide what we become next. Not through force, through choice. He gestured to the forest full of watching wolves. You want to see if this is real? Come see. Want to be part of rebuilding? Join us. Want to oppose what we're doing? Step forward and let's talk about why. Silence held for a long moment. Then wolves began moving from the forest, slowly at first, then in waves, coming to witness, to participate, to choose. The arena filled beyond capacity, wolves climbing walls, standing on ruins, packed so tight breathing was difficult, all of them watching Celine, all of them waiting to see what the first sovereign in 3 centuries would do with the power they'd feared for so long. She looked at the sea of faces, saw fear and hope and anger and curiosity, saw the future waiting to be written, and understood that this moment would define everything. She could crush them, command their submission, become the tyrant they'd always feared. She could run, abdicate responsibility, let someone else carry this weight. Or she could do something no sovereign had ever tried. She could share the power. Celine stepped forward to address the gathered thousands. Her voice carried through silence so complete, even breathing seemed loud. My name is Celine Vera. I'm Omega born, sovereign blood, and I'm done being what anyone else decides I should be. She let that settle. The council wanted me dead because I threatened their power. Veyron wanted me controlled because I legitimized his coup. Neither of them asked what I wanted. Neither considered that maybe I had my own vision. She spread her arms to encompass everyone. So here's what I'm offering, not rule. Partnership. We rebuild this kingdom together. Every wolf gets a voice. Every decision gets debated. Power flows from consent instead of force. The crowd stirred, skepticism mixing with interest. I know what you're thinking. That's idealistic. That's impossible. That wolves need hierarchy. But I'm living proof that everything you were taught about hierarchy is a lie. I was nothing until I refused to be nothing anymore. Her power rose, just enough to be felt. Just enough to remind them what she carried. I'm not asking you to follow me blindly. I'm asking you to choose what you want to build. And I'm promising that whatever we create, it won't be maintained through genocide and fear. She looked at every section of the crowd. Tomorrow we start councils. Open debate. Anyone can speak. Everyone gets heard. We'll make mistakes. We'll argue. It'll be messy and hard, and sometimes we'll want to go back to the old ways because at least those were simple. But simple isn't the same as right. The words echoed off stone. Who's with me? Silence. Stretching. Unbearable. Then a voice from the crowd. An Omega. Young, terrified. I am. Another voice. A Beta. Me too. Then a flood. Wolves pledging. Not submission. support. The difference was everything. The arena thundered with voices choosing. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough to build from. Celine looked at Kyle. He nodded once, pride clear in his expression. They'd done it. Survived the impossible, changed the conversation, offered alternatives. But even in that moment of triumph, Celine felt the weight settling over her shoulders. The responsibility of every wolf who'd chosen to trust her. The magnitude of rebuilding an entire kingdom's foundation. This was just the beginning. The hard part stretched ahead. And somewhere in the watching crowd, wolves who hadn't pledged support were making their own calculations, planning their own moves. The old powers didn't die easily. They adapted, regrouped, waited for opportunities. Celine felt their eyes on her, felt the targeting, the hunger, the determination to destroy what threatened them before it could grow strong enough to survive. Kyle moved beside her. We should secure the perimeter. There are wolves in that crowd who want you dead. I know, but not tonight. Tonight you gave them hope. That's worth protecting. They moved through the crowd together, this sovereign and her commander, surrounded by wolves who'd chosen to try building something better. And in the shadows at the edge of the gathering, a figure watched with cold calculation. Council member who'd escaped. A loyalist to the old ways. Someone who understood that this fragile new order could be shattered with the right pressure at the right time. The figure smiled and faded into darkness. The revolution had started, but the real war was just beginning. The attack came 3 days later. Celine was in the old council chamber reviewing territorial maps when the explosion tore through the eastern wall. Stone and fire and screaming. The building shook like something massive had struck it with malicious intent. Kyle was moving before the dust settled, blade drawn, positioning himself between Celine and the breach. Through the smoke came figures in council colors. Not the full guard. A strike team. Surgical. Desperate. And leading them was Alpha Lissa, her beautiful face twisted with rage and something that looked almost like grief. You should have died. Lissa's voice carried over the chaos. Should have burned like your mother. Instead, you poisoned everything we built. You built nothing. Celine's power rose instinctively. You maintained a graveyard and called it civilization. Lissa's forces spread through the chamber. 20 warriors, all elite, all committed to restoring the old order by eliminating the threat that had shattered it. Kill the commander first. Lissa's command was cold. Then take her alive. The council remnants want to make an example. Kale's smile was terrible. You're welcome to try. The chamber erupted into violence. Kyle moved like death-given form, every strike economical and brutal. But he was one wolf against 20, and even brilliance had limits. A blade caught his shoulder. Another opened his side. Blood spread across his coat, but he didn't slow. Celine felt the power inside her demanding release, demanding she crush these wolves, end the threat, become the weapon they'd always feared. It would be easy, simple, just unleash the pressure and watch them collapse. But she'd promised herself something different. Promised she wouldn't become the tyrant just because violence was convenient. So instead she focused the power like a blade. Not crushing everyone. Just the 3 wolves moving toward Kyle's blind side. Just enough pressure to drop them without killing. The remaining warriors hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Lissa snarled and lunged at Celine directly, abandoning strategy for raw desperation. Her claws extended, aimed for Celine's throat. Celine caught her wrist, felt bone grind, stared into eyes that had watched countless wolves die to maintain hierarchy. You can't win this. Celine's voice was quiet. The old system is dead. Killing me just makes me a martyr. Then I'll settle for revenge. Lissa twisted, bringing a hidden blade up towards Celine's ribs. Kyle intercepted, his hand catching Lissa's wrist with force that cracked bones. The blade clattered to the floor. Enough. His voice was rough with pain. You've lost. Accept it or die here. Choose. Lissa looked between them. This scarred commander bleeding from a dozen wounds but still standing. This Omega who commanded power absolute but refused to use it like a weapon. The future they represented that had no place for wolves like her. She spat blood. Better dead than irrelevant. And lunged for the fallen blade. Celine's power exploded outward on instinct. Not a measured response. Pure reflex. The pressure hit Lisa like a physical wall, slamming her back against stone hard enough that something cracked audibly. Lisa slumped to the floor, breathing but unconscious. Around her, the remaining warriors dropped their weapons. Not from pressure, from recognition that this fight was over. Celine stood in the destroyed council chamber, breathing hard, staring at what she'd done. She'd tried to be different, tried to avoid becoming the monster, but violence had found her anyway, and she'd responded with the same brutal efficiency the old system had taught everyone. Kyle moved beside her, his hand finding her shoulder. "You defended yourself. That's different from aggression, is it?" She looked at the unconscious wolves scattered across the floor. "Or am I just better at justifying it?" "The distinction matters." Kale's voice was firm. "They came to kill you. You stopped them without killing them. That's the difference between justice and tyranny." Footsteps in the corridor. Marcus appeared with reinforcements, his broken arm now properly set. He stopped at the chamber entrance, taking in the destruction. "We got reports of an explosion." His eyes found the unconscious attackers. Council remnants. The last of them, probably. Kael's assessment was clinical despite his injuries. Lissa knew this was her final chance to restore the old order. She gambled everything, and lost. Marcus moved to secure the unconscious wolves. "What do we do with them?" "Trial." Celine's voice was steady. "Public. Like we promised. Let everyone see what they did and decide together what justice looks like. Some will want execution. Then we debate it. We vote. We build consensus instead of just imposing will." She looked at Kael. "Isn't that what we're trying to create?" "It is. But be prepared for how hard it gets when mercy conflicts with safety." She knew he was right, knew that building something better meant wrestling with impossible questions that had no clean answers. But the alternative was returning to the simplicity of might makes right, and that path led nowhere but circles of revenge. The next 3 weeks were brutal in ways combat never prepared anyone for. They held trials, open, public. Every wolf who'd committed crimes under the old system or during the coup faced judgment from councils that represented every rank. The debates were vicious. Some wolves demanded blood, others advocated mercy. Every decision was contested, every verdict questioned. Lissa stood trial for attempted murder and conspiracy to restore the council through violence. The debate lasted 4 days. In the end, she was sentenced to exile, permanent removal from the territories with execution if she returned. She accepted the verdict with cold dignity, met Celine's eyes once before leaving. "You think you've won, but systems don't change just because you want them to. Give it 10 years. 20. The hierarchy will reform because wolves need structure, and when it does, they'll remember me as the last defender of order before chaos consumed everything. Maybe." Celine held her gaze. "Or maybe they'll remember you as the wolf who tried to kill progress, because change terrified you more than stagnation." Lissa left without another word, escorted to the border by guards who'd once served her. Watching her disappear into the forest, Celine felt something complicated. Not triumph, not even satisfaction, just exhaustion mixed with the recognition that this was only one battle in a war that would probably outlast her lifetime. Varen's trial was different. He hadn't attacked anyone during the revolution's aftermath, had actually helped maintain order while the new system took shape. But his coup attempt and manipulation of Celine couldn't be ignored. The debate raged for a week. His daughter Karis spoke in his defense, arguing that he genuinely believed in reform even if his methods were wrong. Others demanded he face the same justice any common wolf would for attempting to overthrow legitimate authority. In the end, the verdict was service. 10 years working to rebuild the territories he'd helped damage. No rank, no privilege, just labor alongside everyone else. Varon accepted without complaint. Before leaving to begin his sentence, he approached Celine privately. "I still believe you'll fail." His voice held no malice. "Not because you're weak, but because what you're attempting is impossible. Wolves need hierarchy. It's written into our DNA. Maybe." Celine met his eyes. "Or maybe we just never tried building anything else. I'd rather fail attempting the impossible than succeed at maintaining oppression." "That's the difference between us." Varen's smile was sad. "You have hope. I have history. Then let's see which one matters more." He left to begin his sentence. Celine watched him go and understood that wolves like Varon would always exist. Pragmatists who couldn't imagine alternatives to what had always been. Her job was to prove them wrong through action rather than argument. The hardest trial was Marcus. Cale's former second stood before the council accused of treason, attempted murder, and betrayal of trust. The evidence was overwhelming. His confession was complete. By every measure, he deserved severe punishment. But he'd also helped defend the arena during the revolution, had fought against council forces trying to crush the new order, had chosen imperfectly, but ultimately chosen the side of change. Cale spoke at the trial. His testimony was devastating, not because it condemned, but because it humanized. Marcus betrayed me because the system gave him impossible choices. Cale's voice carried across the packed chamber. Serve loyally and watch his family starve. Take the council's gold and become a traitor. Those were his options, not because he was weak, but because we built a society where survival required compromising honor. He looked at Marcus directly. I'm not excusing what he did. I'm saying we created the circumstances that made betrayal rational. And if we punish him without acknowledging that, we're just perpetuating the same broken system with different names. The debate lasted 3 days. In the end, Marcus was sentenced to community rebuilding with his family under supervision. Not free, not imprisoned. Something in between that acknowledged both his crime and the context that produced it. When the verdict was read, Marcus wept. Not from relief. From the weight of being forgiven when he couldn't forgive himself. Cale approached him after. They stood facing each other, former brothers in arms with betrayal between them. I can't take it back. Marcus's voice was broken. Can't undo what I did. No. Cale's expression was unreadable. But you can spend the rest of your life building instead of destroying. That counts for something. Does it? Ask me in 10 years. They didn't embrace, didn't pretend the wound had healed, but they nodded once. Acknowledgement that maybe redemption was possible even after the worst mistakes. Watching them, Celine understood something fundamental about the system they were building. It wasn't about being soft or naive. It was about recognizing that cruelty created more cruelty, that punishment without rehabilitation just perpetuated cycles of harm. It was harder than simple justice, messier, more frustrating. But it was also the only way forward that didn't just repeat the past with different wolves on top. 2 months after the revolution, the first true council convened. Not alphas dictating from thrones. Representatives from every rank, every territory, every perspective. Omega and Alpha sat side by side. Debates were fierce but nonviolent. Decisions required consensus rather than dominance. It was chaos. Arguments that lasted days. Disagreements that seemed insurmountable. Moments when the whole structure felt like it would collapse under the weight of trying to include everyone. But slowly, painfully, impossibly, it worked. Laws were drafted, not to maintain hierarchy but to protect autonomy. Resources were redistributed, not equally but equitably, with those who'd been denied getting priority. Systems of accountability were established. Anyone could challenge authority. Every decision could be appealed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even particularly efficient. But it was different, and different was progress. Celine spent those months learning to lead without dominating, learning that sovereignty didn't mean commanding absolute obedience, but facilitating space for every voice to be heard. She made mistakes, pushed too hard sometimes, deferred too much others. Every day was a lesson in balancing power with responsibility. Cale was her constant advisor, her conscience when frustration tempted her toward easier solutions. His wounds had healed but slowly, leaving new scars to join the collection. He wore them without complaint, reminders of what they'd survived and what they were building. One night, 3 months into the reconstruction, they stood on the castle walls watching the territories stretch into darkness. Lights from settlements dotted the landscape, places where wolves were building new lives under new systems. Think it'll last? Celine's voice was quiet. Honestly. Cale leaned against the stone. I have no idea. We're attempting something that's never been done. Could collapse tomorrow. Could thrive for generations. Comforting. I didn't promise comfort, just truth. He looked at her. But I can promise this. Whatever happens, you change the conversation. Proved alternatives exist. That's worth something even if it fails. Is it? She thought about all the wolves who'd died, all the pain the transition had caused, all the wolves who'd lost their place in the old hierarchy, and struggled in the new one. Was disruption worth it when the outcome was uncertain? Kale seemed to read her thoughts. The old system was killing people, slowly, through oppression and erasure and grinding down anyone different. That wasn't sustainable. It was just slower violence. So we replaced it with faster violence. We replaced it with the possibility of peace. Whether wolves choose peace is up to them. It was the same argument they'd had a dozen times. Would probably have 1,000 more. Because building something better meant constant questioning, constant evaluation, constant willingness to adapt. There was no finish line, no moment of completion, just endless work toward incremental improvement. And somehow, Celine was discovering that was enough. 6 months after the revolution, a ceremony was held, not a coronation. Celine had refused any formal title of authority, but the territories wanted to mark the transition, to acknowledge what had changed and commit to what came next. The arena where she'd offered wolves a choice was now a gathering space for the new council. The blood had been cleaned, the execution platforms dismantled. In their place, simple benches arranged in circles where anyone could speak and everyone could be heard. Thousands of wolves gathered, not to witness judgment, but to participate in commitment. Representatives from every territory came forward and pledged support, not obedience, partnership. The difference was everything. When Celine's turn came, she stood in the center and felt the weight of every eye upon her, felt the expectation and hope and fear and uncertainty, felt the magnitude of what they were attempting. She thought about her mother burning, about 16 years living as nothing, about 3 days learning to refuse, about the battles and betrayals and impossible choices that had brought them here. And she spoke from a place of hard-won understanding. I'm not your queen. I'm not your ruler. I'm just a wolf who refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. Her voice carried across absolute silence. We've torn down a system that took 3 centuries to build. That should terrify us. Because systems provide structure and humans fear chaos more than oppression. She looked at the gathered thousands. But fear isn't a good enough reason to maintain injustice. Comfort isn't worth the cost of grinding down everyone who doesn't fit the hierarchy. So we're trying something different, something harder, something that might fail spectacularly. She let that truth settle. I can't promise success. Can't promise this won't collapse. Can't even promise I'm the right wolf to help guide it. All I can promise is that I'll spend every day trying to build something where worth isn't determined by rank and survival doesn't require becoming smaller. Her power rose. Not commanding, just present. Reminder of what she carried. And I'll promise this too. Anyone who tries to restore the old system through violence will face me. Not because I want power, but because too many wolves died to make this possible. Their sacrifice means we have to at least try. She lowered her voice, but somehow it carried further. So here's what I'm asking. Not obedience. Participation. Help build this. Question it. Challenge it. Make it better through involvement rather than sabotage. And if you can't do that, if you genuinely believe the old ways were better, leave peacefully. No punishment, no judgment, just go. She spread her arms. But if you stay, you're choosing this. Choosing the hard work of building consensus. Choosing to see Omega and Alpha as equals. Choosing something your ancestors thought impossible. The silence held. Then wolves began responding. Not with submission, with commitment. Voices rising from every section, pledging support not to her, but to the idea she represented. That change was possible, that systems could evolve, that maybe they could build something their descendants would be proud of instead of ashamed. Kael stood at the arena's edge watching. When the ceremony concluded and wolves dispersed to celebrate or debate or simply process, he approached her. Well done. I just made promises I can't guarantee keeping. That's leadership. His smile was tired but genuine. Making commitments beyond your certainty because people need direction even when the path is unclear. That sounds like a recipe for disappointment. Or inspiration. Depends on how you frame it. They walked through the arena together, this sovereign who commanded power absolute but chose restraint, and this commander who'd sacrificed everything to build something better. Around them, wolves celebrated. Music rose from various sections. Children who'd never known the old hierarchy played without understanding how different their lives were from their parents' generation. Omega and Alpha shared food without thought to rank. It was imperfect, messy. Arguments still broke out. Hierarchies were already trying to reassert themselves in subtle ways. The work was endless and the outcome uncertain. But it was different. And different was progress. That night, Celine stood alone in the room that had once been council chambers. The thrones had been removed, the symbols of absolute authority destroyed. In their place, simple furniture arranged for conversation rather than decree. She ran her fingers over the stone wall where ancient carvings documented 3 centuries of council rule. Names of chancellors, records of laws, history written by victors. Tomorrow they'd begin carving new history. Records of consensus instead of command, names of all representatives instead of just alphas. A narrative that included everyone instead of erasing those who didn't fit. But tonight she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. The exhaustion, the uncertainty, the fear that she'd led wolves away from stable oppression into chaotic freedom, and they'd all pay the price for her hubris. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. Knew his presence by now like her own. Can't sleep. Cale's voice was soft. Too many ghosts. Yours or theirs, both. He moved beside her. They stood in companionable silence, 2 wolves who'd survived impossible things and committed to building something even harder. Do you ever regret it? Celine's question was quiet. Teaching me, protecting me, choosing this over the life you had, every day. His honesty was brutal and somehow comforting. I think about what I sacrificed, the certainty I gave up, the simplicity of just following orders instead of questioning everything. But regret doesn't mean it was wrong, just means it was hard. And I'd rather live with the regret of trying than the shame of maintaining something broken, because change was too difficult. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The scars, the exhaustion, the weight he carried from every wolf who died making this possible. He'd given up everything for a dream that might fail. For a wolf he barely knew who represented something he believed in more than his own comfort. Why? The question encompassed everything. Cale was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried decades of pain and hope tangled together. Because when I was 17, I watched an Omega get executed for stealing bread. And nobody questioned it. Nobody wondered if maybe a system that required theft for survival was broken. They just killed her and moved on. He met Celine's eyes. I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to break that system. You just gave me the catalyst, so no. I don't regret protecting you. I regret that it took so long to find someone worth protecting. The words hung between them, not a declaration, not a promise, just truth offered without expectation. Celine felt something shift inside her, not love, not yet, but recognition. That this wolf had seen her at her absolute lowest and decided she was worth saving. That he'd sacrificed everything not for her but for what she represented. That his loyalty was to the dream of something better, and she just happened to be the vessel. It was strangely freeing, knowing she wasn't carrying this alone. That somewhere in this impossible journey, she'd found a partner who understood that building something better mattered more than personal comfort. Thank you. The words were inadequate but sincere. Don't thank me yet. Cale's smile was wry. We might still fail spectacularly. Then we fail together. Deal. They stood in the empty council chamber, surrounded by ghosts of the past and uncertainty about the future, and committed to walking forward anyway. Because that's what leadership really meant. Not certainty, not promises of success, just willingness to try building something better, even when failure was probable. A year after the revolution, Celine stood in the forest where she'd collapsed, frozen and dying, convinced her bloodline was meant to end. The trees were the same, the ground unchanged, but everything else was different. She wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding. She'd returned to this place deliberately, needing to close a circle. The territories had survived their first year of new governance. Barely. There had been challenges, setbacks, moments when the whole structure threatened to collapse. But they'd adapted, learned, built consensus even when it seemed impossible. 3 new territories had joined the alliance. Omega representation had increased. Laws protecting autonomy had been established. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And Celine had learned something fundamental about power. That sovereignty wasn't about commanding obedience. It was about creating space for others to find their own strength. That her bloodline's greatest gift wasn't the ability to crush resistance, but the capacity to inspire choice. She closed her eyes and reached for that place inside her chest. The power was still there, still dangerous, but controlled now. Part of her, instead of something that controlled her. She thought about her mother, about the woman who died screaming her daughter's name, about 16 years of thinking she was nobody, about the moment in that hall when she'd finally refused to disappear, and she spoke to the ghost that haunted this forest. I survived. I'm building something you never got to see. I'm proving that our bloodline doesn't have to be erased to keep wolves safe. The forest held no answers, but somehow she felt lighter. Footsteps behind her. Kyle emerged from the trees. She'd known he'd follow. He always did. Found you. I wasn't hiding, I know. He moved beside her. Just wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm good. She looked at the place where she'd almost died. Better than good, actually. Because I finally understand what my mother was trying to protect. Not just my life. My right to exist without apology. My capacity to choose what I became instead of accepting what they decided I should be. She turned to face him. She died so I could live. But more than that. So I could refuse. So I could stand in front of hundreds of wolves and offer them something different. She gave me the gift of choice even though it cost her everything. Kael's expression was soft. That's legacy. Not bloodline or power. Just the gift of possibility passed forward. They stood together in the forest, two wolves who'd survived impossible things and built something improbable, and felt the weight of what they carried. Not just for themselves, but for everyone who came after. For the children who'd never know the old hierarchy. For the wolves who'd finally found voice. For the future that was being written one difficult choice at a time. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't victory. It was just continuation. The endless work of building and maintaining and adapting. And somehow, that was enough. Celine took one last look at the place where she'd almost ended, then turned and walked back toward the territories. Toward the council chambers. Toward the work that never finished but mattered anyway. Kael walked beside her, not leading, not following, just present. Behind them, the forest stood silent, witness to transformation, monument to survival. And ahead, the future waited. Uncertain, difficult, possible. The last of the evening light painted the sky in colors that reminded Celine of fire, of burning, of the price her bloodline had paid for 3 centuries, but also of dawn, of renewal, of the possibility that maybe, finally, something different could take root. She thought about the Omega servant who couldn't meet anyone's eyes, about the girl who'd been humiliated in front of hundreds, about the moment when she'd finally looked up and refused to bow. That girl had died in that hall, and something stronger had been born. Not because she'd become cruel or hard, but because she'd learned that strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about refusing to be diminished, about holding power absolute but choosing restraint, about building instead of destroying. Her mother had been right. Sovereignty wasn't about rule, it was about responsibility, about carrying weight others couldn't bear, about making impossible choices and living with the consequences. Celine had spent a year learning what that meant, learning to lead without dominating, learning to use power without becoming defined by it, learning that the hardest battles weren't fought with strength, but with the discipline to hold back when crushing resistance would be easier. And she'd learned one more thing, something that would have been impossible to understand before the revolution. That transformation wasn't a destination, it was a process. Endless, difficult, worth it. She would spend the rest of her life building, making mistakes, adapting, trying to create something her descendants could be proud of. But tonight, walking through the forest with Kael beside her, she allowed herself to feel something she'd never experienced before. Peace. Not because the work was done, because she'd finally accepted that it never would be. That building something better was the work of generations, not moments. That her role was just to start the process and trust that others would carry it forward. The territories came into view below. Lights scattered across the landscape. Wolves living their lives under systems that gave them voice instead of just demanding submission. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was different. And different was everything. Celine Vera, the Omega who'd made Alphas kneel, the sovereign who'd chosen mercy over domination, the girl who'd refused to disappear, stood on the ridge overlooking the territories she'd helped transform and felt the weight of what they'd built. Not a kingdom, a community, not a hierarchy, A partnership. Not an ending. A beginning. And somewhere in the wind that carried across the valleys, she heard the echo of wolves who'd come before. Her mother. Her ancestors. Every sovereign who'd been erased for threatening the natural order. They'd died believing their bloodline would end in fire and forgetting. But they'd been wrong. Because Celine had survived, had refused, had transformed erasure into resurrection. And that was legacy enough. She turned to Kael. His expression mirrored her own. Exhaustion, satisfaction, commitment to whatever came next. Ready for what? Everything else. His smile was tired, but genuine. Always. They descended toward the territories together, toward councils that needed guidance, toward wolves who still struggled with change, toward work that would consume the rest of their lives. But they walked without hesitation, without regret. Because some things were worth fighting for even when success wasn't guaranteed. Some transformations were worth pursuing even when the path was unclear. Some choices defined you not by their outcomes, but by your willingness to make them. And as the last light faded and stars emerged above the territories, Celine understood what sovereignty really meant. Not power over others, power within yourself. The power to choose who you became instead of accepting what you were told to be. The power to build instead of destroy. The power to offer mercy when revenge would be easier. The power to transform pain into purpose. That was the gift her bloodline carried. Not domination, inspiration. And she would spend the rest of her life proving that strength without tyranny was possible. That power without cruelty could exist. That maybe, impossibly, they could build something better than what had come before. The territories awaited, the work continued. The future remained uncertain. But for the first time in her life, Celine Vera walked forward without fear. Because she'd learned the most important lesson power could teach. That true strength wasn't about making others bow. It was about standing tall yourself and creating space for everyone else to do the same. And that was how revolutions really succeeded. Not through conquest, through transformation. One choice at a time. One wolf at a time. One impossible dream built into reality through endless work and stubborn hope. The Omega who'd been nothing had become everything she'd needed to be. Not a queen, not a tyrant, not a weapon. Just herself. Finally. Completely. Without apology. And that was enough. That was everything.